Hello, everybody, and welcome to another PmP end of month review. This time we're looking back at February, all the submissions in the PmP Painters Motivating Painters group. Now, this is actually, I normally say our Google Plus hobby community, and it is still for this moment. This is the last month that we're doing the reviews in the Google Plus group. As you would have already seen by the post we put up, in the PmP, and there'll be a video coming specifically on what I'm about to say. We are transitioning away from Google Plus because it's dying. We're sad to see it go, but Google is shutting it down. Shut it down. They're taking their ball and going home, but none of us are happy about it. I would have liked to stay here. We've made a happy little successful community, but here we are. So we are transitioning over to a Facebook group, and Kiran, I would like to say but let's be honest, it was all Kiran, has found a way where we can still preserve the end of month review. The instructions will be in that specific video, but effectively and in short, every month there will be a new event that is created, and under that event, people can put in posts. Those posts remain in chronological order when they're under an event. They can be commented on normally. So all other tabs, kind of like just discussion and your, kind of your progress stuff and things you're just asking questions for, those go in the normal feed. People will ask, ask and answered and those sorts of stuff. Just normal conversation will happen like always happens in Google or Facebook. But when we do the end of month review, we need to obviously be able to scroll through everything in chronological order, keep things, organized appropriately, right? So there'll be a singular event that will go up on the first of every month. You will post your end of month review in that event. Kiran and I have already done a bunch of testing this month on this in the group we created, just to make sure that everything stuck, that we could comment, that, everything just held exactly how we wanted. And it does work just fine. We have to make it it's a little complicated, but we'll all get there. Don't worry. As we transition over to our new platform. So Kiran, anything you want to say on that, since you were really the founder of this particular feast? I'm not trying to blame you or anything. You solved the problem.
Well, it could be both, right? It could, depending on how it goes. I could be the savior or the downfall. But so we'll see how it plays out.
Don't fear the Reaper.
The intention, as Vince said, it is going to simplify things in some ways, but in other ways it doesn't let us be as diverse because we can't submenu it as much as we have here in the Google Plus community. But we've come up with some workarounds, and as Vince said, we played around on a few different platforms, and this seems to be the one that, again, with my familiarity and the needs of this community to be able to do this show on a monthly basis, that's where we've settled. So look to that next month, boys and girls.
Absolutely. So with that being said, for now, we continue on as normal. We're going to review all those submissions tagged end of month review in the Google Plus group and try to give our best feedback to the artists to try to help them take their next step. If you want to join us, well, hey, in this video, look, there's a link to that Facebook group. You can click on that and request to join. It is a closed group. You do have to request to join and so on and so forth. So we'll do our best to keep spam and moderate that. Obviously, Facebook, it's easier for those kinds of things to get in, but don't worry. We're not asleep at the helm here. The admins will be ever vigilant. So it's so really good. Like, your microphone's really good how it picked that up. It's actually quite solid. But at any rate, gentlemen, are you ready in mind, body, and spirit to jump into the review?
Yeah, let's give them our best.
Let's do it.
All right.
Send the Google Plus out with a bang.
That's right. We'll send off Google Plus in style here. So we begin with Alan Thomas, Reichner the Grimhauler. So he had said he's looking for some overall feedback, as well as feedback on the airbrush transitions and the leather effect on the cloak. He couldn't quite dial in the lighting, so the wing veins are even more muted than they appear normally, and the white areas aren't quite as bright as they are in person. Okay, cool. Yeah, picture taking can sometimes, it's the worst. It is the worst. All right, so let's talk about some of these things that you mentioned here. So first off, on the airbrush transitions, Just generally kind of looking around at what you're airbrushing. Yeah, looks fine. I don't see much of an issue there. Everything looks pretty smooth. In fact, it might look a bit too smooth. That is to say, like sometimes airbrushing can actually look too smooth. You can kind of reduce that by getting some inks up in there. Inks kind of have a transparency that tends to get rid of the airbrushy look, but you don't really have that too badly. A little bit into the white because white tends to look like that, but overall, I think the wings actually look quite nice. You may want to darken the veins down a little bit more. Not the veins, the whatever these are, the like the skeletal structure of the wings is what I mean, just so they contrast a little more. Because you've got a lot of bright up here, and so something like that could really help. The leather, you asked for feedback on that. Yeah, I think we need more variation. So it still looks a little too flat, like we painted it brown and then put the other stuff in. I think with leather, I like series of washes over stippling. So, sort of deep black brown stipples, ivory stipples, slashes, hashes, dots, and then you kind of wash everything down and you wash it in different places, some sepia, some agrax, some different sepia inks, whatever you want. Then you kind of stipple again, then you wash it again, then you kind of hash the edge, and you just kind of repeat this process a bunch of times until you get this naturally, like, really overlapping organic look. So that would be my feedback on that, because I like your edging here, but it's a little consistent, right? Like you have a hash that's about that long, that's the same length, and 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 that's the same length. That's not how leather scratches, right? It would be very, it would look like a kind of almost like a heart monitor, right? And how it bounces up and down, not angular, but you know what I mean, like in different peaks and valleys, right? My only other thought is down here on the base with the statue. Anytime you've got stone going on, yeah, I understand you want it muted, but it's pretty boring down here. We could have some more going on, some more variation and interest in that stone. We could bring down some more transitions, edges on the stone, cracks, colors. The stone could have browns and greens in it, maybe some reds, maybe even some blues. Why the heck not? These could be casting some very weak light, so we could add a little just light green touch around here. Just stuff like that to kind of up the visual interest of those areas. But overall, I like things like I think the transition looks really, really good. I think your candles look really nice. I think that green is an interesting pop color to that. You may want to try to work it in just like one more place down here. I'm not sure where that would be, but that could be his eyes, could be his eyes, could be, something like that. Could be this smoke, could be that same color green, because why not? Who cares? Like it's his magical hoof smoke. Can be whatever color you want it to be. Doesn't have to be the same blue as up there. It's magical hoof smoke. It's your hoof smoke. I'm gonna say hoof smoke more times. But I like the transition on the blade. You work some nice shading in there. That looks good. So overall, yeah, he's a cool piece. I mean, he's such a dynamic model. I really do like Reichner a lot. I think he's pretty awesome. All right.
Yeah, green and blue on the base. You could probably accent some stones that way too.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Take that up. So we don't just have kind of like flat gray down there. All right. John Gallant brings us a little adventuring dwarf.
Yeah, this is a characterful little fellow. Loading the crossbow for the next orc eyeball, I'm sure. So starting off here, John, I think that the winners here, there's two winners, and then there's two, I don't want to say losers, but two things that we can improve on. So winner number one is the richness of the jade and your brown tones. Both of those feel lively, yet still within the realm that they belong in. So in other words, it's not a candy-colored jade. It still has some variation of color there. There's depth in the folds that go into, some deeper bluish colors, and you have shadows in the appropriate places. Because John's done this nice little compilation, which we love, by the way, if you folks can collage this action. The bottom right photo shows us a lot of the leathers and wood. So he's got a rich wood for this guy's beer barrel that he totes around with him. That's important to a dwarf because he always keeps that clean and tidy. It's always in use. And the leathers for his quiver boots, etc. He does enough between the quiver and the boots to do some differentiation of tone with that. And I actually appreciate that, even the subtlety of it, because the boots would obviously be a bit darker, closer to the ground, muddy, scuffed, mistreated, more so than the quiver, which isn't hitting the ground very much except for when this guy's taking a nap. So subtleties like that in the leather are the bits that I certainly do appreciate. Now, turning it to things that I think could use a bit of improvement is the big feature of a dwarf, which is this guy's braided red beard. And I feel like that could move through a little bit more color variation. No matter what color a beard is, it's almost always darker at the root of the hair and then gets lighter as it goes away from this. I've grown a couple beards in my life. I'm currently growing one right now. And so I can attest to this, that's sort of how that comes together. So I would like to see it darker at the root near the face and then get a little bit lighter as you go away. When doing the reds and oranges like this, you got to be careful about that because we want to not go into a bright orange or a bright yellow, especially. We don't want to go into there. So quite often that means we got to start a little bit darker than we think that we're doing. So a reddish, a deeper reddish brown, or even just a, even a richer chocolatey brown at the root is probably where to go. And then you can build up to end on this at the highest highlight where you're at right now, probably. So you have to tone down the other parts in between. Now, the other thing I'd suggest that we could do as well to gain a little bit of depth, there's not a lot of exposed face on this guy, but there is still certainly enough that you can add a little bit of color to it. A popular way to go with dwarfs especially is to get a little bit of rosiness or a little bit of reddishness in the cheeks and the nose. It would go well characterfully with this guy because he's got a beer keg on his hip already. So despite the fact that he's going out to war, he's probably had a few slugs on that thing before he loaded up this crossbow. So just some light glazing on spaces like that, on the cheekbones, on the end of the nose, I think would pay off and give this guy some more character. And I think those are my suggestions to pull this guy together and step it up a little bit more, John. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with as I said, the jade, the browns, handle those really well. A couple bits around the face where the focal point is, and you got a much better looking model. There you have it.
Right on. Okay.
Nice.
Let's go to Ryan Easterling and some Canary.
All right. Ryan, thanks for submitting these. They look fantastic. I really enjoy the color choices here with kind of that seafoam green, the pinks, and then the kind of scarlet colored stuff. I think so. Yeah, really unique and fits really well with or contrasts really well with the basing as well. You've got the broken up kind of brown sandy, and then a little bit of these kind of rough tufts. Rough Tufts is probably the name brand of the tuft company I'm going to make, and not my cover band. But yeah, so all of that looks really cool. The question you had was, that you like how the wings came out. I'm assuming that means kind of tones and that sort of thing, but something feels off for you. There's a couple of things that could be, and these are just my impressions, obviously. One, I can definitely tell that there is a different tone at the under wing. So the what would typically be kind of the inside of the wing, and then it's a little bit lighter on the outside of the wing. So I'm picking up at that a little bit, but I think you could push that further, and not necessarily to the point where you need to go darker overall, but you want to kind of push those differences a little bit more. And I think another thing that can help, I think what you're give you the dimensionality, because these are very dynamic wings. They've got a lot of curve to them, etc. But you may not be taking as full advantage of that as you want to be, or what would feel natural. And so one thing you could be doing is on your inner wing, taking some shade or taking some ink and kind of giving them a shadow underneath so where it curves, convexes inward, and goes to the next kind of finger.
Nope. Did we lose Erik?
Am I still here?
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Hello.
Now.
Hello. Okay.
You pushed the wrong button. Erik.
So as I was saying, what's that?
You pushed the wrong button.
I must have done mid-mute. I like that. So if you can do some shading underneath those fingers on the inside, that's going to darken up the inside. It's going to make that tone a little bit, that reddish a little darker. And you can make up your own shade using that same color, mix in a little bit of black or a little bit of brown, and some water, maybe some medium, and you just make it thinner, get up underneath there, and you're going to darken that up a little bit. And then on the outside, I'm not seeing, maybe there's a little bit of dry, I don't know if you've been doing a little bit of dry brushing, etc., but I think you can go further with the highlight. And what that's going to do is you can either do some striations that go from the kind of perpendicular to the fingers, so that they kind of go down the wing at the top. So you're kind of creating, the wing is, I'm trying to figure it, from the hand out to the fingers of the wing, would be one direction. Do your striations perpendicular to that.
Did we lose you again, Erik?
Because I'm really.
You're intermittent, Erik.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. I don't know
You're
what's
back.
going on. All right, so maybe my connection's dying on me, but so those striations would on the outside of the wings would help us see that curve a little bit more, add some wear and tear, etc. So I think there's a number of things you could do to there, and then there's a number of little membranes and those sorts of things that you could pick out as well. But I think to keep it simple, to darken up not the entire interior wing, but just shadows underneath those, the fingers of the wing, and on the exterior, some striations, some hashing or something with a light color to highlight the tops of those curves and show us kind of more dimensionality there. I think could help. So they look great color scheme. Looking forward to seeing what more you do for this army.
Yes.
Right on. Okay. So next up, we have Tam the Third, who brings us a little Korgorath. By little, I mean he's big boy. Then we've got Robert Matuzio, who has some Glade Riders for his D&D group. And then we have a Dark Angel with some a big freehand banner he was looking for feedback on. I would love to take the Dark Angel and the freehand banner, if that's okay with you, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Granted.
What are you feeling, Kiran?
Well, maybe I want to talk about some wood elves.
You want the elves? Cool.
All right. And the Korgorath to Erik. So, or I guess Hellbrute. It's become a Hellbrute. It's conversions all over the place here. We're not using any of these for how they're supposed to. I love it. It's great. I don't know. I guess the Dark Angel's kind of hit. Okay. So here we go. Liam had originally posted this and said he was looking for some feedback on like the freehand and how he did overall. He had posted it with like a gray background, but he liked it better with the white. So no problem. I read the other post before I saw this one. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple things here that aren't the banner just very quickly. Things I really like and things I think we could take a step up. So things I really like on the, and actually let me see if I can get a spin around. There you go. Perfect. Okay. On the Dark Angel himself. I feel like we could, in general, when you're doing a freehand with metallic paint, like you have this stripe, you really want to be careful with that or edge that, because that you see how it doesn't look as smooth and even. Like metal paints don't generally paint straight lines because of the nature of how they flow. So like I wouldn't ever recommend using metallic paints to do freehand lines like this. It's kind of asking for trouble. If you're going to do it, edge it with a matte color and then put that in there. Like a line of black that went through like matte black paint ink mix to clean up this edge, that would improve that vastly. Okay. The other note is just I would think about if you want to push some of your contrast a little, like some darker green up here under the sides of the sort of tummy plate here under his arm or under his in like his sort of armpit joint here under the arm here, just things like that. We could take the shadows down a little farther. I think your scratching and sort of your scratch and dent is, I like the idea of it, but then I think you went to like a silver metal underneath, but that's not actually how paint would scratch. Like, because it wouldn't be bright silver and chrome if you scratched away at it. This is the silver of polished metal. And like, if it's under an enamel, it's not polished. It's just going to be a pretty dull iron because there was no need for somebody to sit there and literally polish it up to a high steel. Like the exposed metal here of your gun is darker than the armor than this, which was never intended to be exposed, right? And actually got damaged to reveal this. So if you're going to use real metal paint under a scratch, as opposed to just like gray paint or black paint or something like that, or black and brown, it should be like a really, 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 really dark steel. Maybe even steel mixed with like some black paint. Okay, so those are just general thoughts on that stuff. One other quick thing on the eyes, your yellow is too strong. Like this is brighter effectively because of its size than the eye itself. You want this, like you got a nice dark ring, which is good. You do a nice job of like making this bright and this dark, but then this is too strong. We need to wheel this back, like green glaze over this whole thing, and you'll be in the right place. Okay. All in all, though, your edge highlighting is really sharp. Your color choice is really well done here. The red of his little tabard and like highlighting that up to the orange. That all looks really, really good. I dig that. Now let's talk about the thing you actually wanted to talk about, which is the banner. And I have to say, I'm blown away by this banner, my friend. You know, from a freehand perspective, I think it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it looks great. Are there things you could do? Sure. The hammer handles being the same exact tonality as the gold hammers themselves is perhaps a bit strange. So like we'd probably want to, you know, we could change the color on that, which if these were darker, like almost a darker brown, they would, with maybe some light edges, they would actually stand out much better against both the gold of the hammers and the gold of the shield. But all in all, this looks absolutely fantastic. I really, really dig this. I like your text down here with these little just, you know, kind of constellations and little notes. The hammers look wonderful. To do a like sort of double symbol like this where you're trying to be very symmetrical is always extremely challenging. So it looks like you really took your time with this. There's a lot of nice contrast in the in like the hammers and the freehand itself, which I think looks wonderful. The rivets look really sharp. The symbol and the salamander sort of fire here looks wonderful. So, and your text is nice and evenly spaced. So like really, really top-notch work on the banner. I think it's great. You know, is there more stuff you could do other than the handles? I mean, it would be a question of whether if you wanted to take it quote unquote realistic, right? Because then you could like weather the parchment more, make the hammers more three-dimensional, stuff like that. But, you know, I don't think that's really necessary, to be completely honest. I think this sells pretty darn well for what it is. I think you're right in the right place here, if I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know that I'd change much other than those handles. It's the only thing that jumps out at me. It's great work, man. Really, really great work. Okay. So now we have formerly the Korgorath, now a Hellbrute.
Yeah. And some great conversions here. Obviously, it's I think when they made the Korgorath, its pose was exactly like I think the older Hellbrute. Older meaning the one that is currently available, not the one that may come out with all the new Chaos release stuff. But yeah, so just kind of cool pose and good cool homage to that. So it makes total sense to convert this back over. Love what you've done with the conversions. Love the kind of addition of the gun built into the hand and the big spiky shoulder thing, et cetera, et cetera. Very cool. And the question here was about, there's so much skin on this thing, and feeling like he didn't do it justice in terms of being able to highlight it up to where he wanted and kind of being able to get the shadows, etc. And I think that there was obviously a couple of our favorites. Mickey had some feedback for him in there, and we plug every time that some of these answers are probably already out there from our community already. So, but I think whenever you struggle to go lighter, whether it mean you can't find the right color, or when you do use a lighter color, it doesn't feel right. For instance, to take this mid-tone color, which feels a lot like Tuskor fur or something to that kind of a brownish, reddish pink. It's tough to go up because you're just kind of, the only places to go are pink, or kind of a white, or into a kind of a light.
Suffering more intermittent Erik.
Yep, he's gone again. Erik, are you back?
It's only because we like to build the drama.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, leave everybody waiting on.
You got to make you wait for it.
Bated breath.
Wait for the golden nugget of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me yet?
Sure, it's coming.
Hey, there you go. Now you're back.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. I may need to reconnect in a minute.
That's fine.
So whenever you're struggling to go light, because it's, this is a gruesome character, you don't want to go too bright, you don't want to go too pink or anything like that. I think your best place to go is darker. There's a lot of things you can do with shade and shadow and overall kind of lights and darks. And in the end, the image, the miniature still reads as the color that you want as your primary color. And so some ways of doing that are so you can certainly look at the muscle, each individual muscle group or muscle, and do more to go from a much darker place, a darker purple or a darker kind of place. It looks like that leg to the right has a darker tone to it. And so I would chase more of that. And you can do that in individual muscle group, or you can do it as the body as a whole, right? So for instance, you've got a lot of stuff in shadow, or you've got a lot of stuff down by the hooves. Darken those up a lot. Take that up into a purple, and then go into your current color, and use that your current kind of mid-tone as your highlight down in those areas to bring those back up, but keep them mostly dark, mostly purples, mostly bluish, and then let that be your highest color. And you give your mid-tone the opportunity to be a highlight if more of your model is darker. And you don't right now, if you keep that as your mid-tone, then you feel like you have to go brighter. So if you go darker, use your current mid-tone as your highlight and use it in more places. It will read as that tone, but it's just your gruesome, it's darker version of that. And so that's, I think, your best bet if you're not wanting to go up into too much pink or white or that sort of thing. Go darker or go home. Is that how they say go dark or go home? No?
Yeah.
That's the exact quote. Yeah, he nailed it.
All right. Thanks for submitting.
All right. Next up, we've got Robert Batuzio and some Glade Riders.
Right. So in Robert's comments here, he wanted to talk about the no metal, but that's not all I want to talk about. I want to talk about a couple of other things too. So I will circle back to that. What I would say here is the brightness of color hits you right away, of course, and the yellow comes in pretty hot. The vibrancy of the green comes in well, also, but that's also because he's doing a lot of rune glow. So on the helms or foreheads or whatever these things are, of the does, he is coming in with some rune glow on those pieces, but he's also got rune glow on some weapons and coming out of the eyes of both the deer and the riders. Now, for the most part, I think this works pretty good. If you want to give, if you can flip to a sidelong photo for me, Vince, I want to talk about the eye glow first. And looking at here, there's two things I think that you can push this home. I think the amount of glow is fine. There might be a couple places where it's coming in a bit hot. But when we look at the helm of this fellow, for example, what I think it would benefit from is a framing around that eye, because it is recessed within the helmet. So if we have a sort of a dark border that frames the eye within that helmet a little bit better, I think that will sell the idea and make it even more dramatic. As an example of that, just look back a couple minutes, and Vince had the similar comment to Liam's Space Marine, where he had done that on the eye lenses as well. He made sure that he had a nice dark frame around the eye. Now, that shows up better on the deer itself because of exactly that, Robert. So look down on that for you viewers at home, and you'll see that that's really well framed, the source of the light. The one thing that I find a little bit odd about this, and we'll see it in other sidelong frames as well, is that light is casting back behind the eye. And I think that is a bit of a disillusion that it comes back behind. I don't know that the glow would cast there. It certainly wouldn't cast anywhere near as brightly. But by leaving it just down the muzzle, you get some directionality. Like, think about the movement and the motion in this deer of running forward and leaping forward. Doing things like this with the glow effect can also add to that motion of it. So that's my couple comments about the eye glow. I think the color toning I'm happy with. It's just those couple of little bits of positioning that I would add. Now, while we're here, the other thing that we wanted to talk about is the non-metal metallic that you've done. And you've done that on both silver, and there's a few other spots where we see it on gold as well. I think that overall, pretty good. You've done some places where you've pulled out more light and had a broader highlight on some scales than you would on others to make sure that we get the idea that that's where the light is striking. This guy's got arm and leg greaves that have a lot of darkness to them to get to a light spot. The scale mail, however, has a whole lot more light than dark, and I think that's a place where you could have left a little bit more darkness to it to sharpen that up a little bit better. But it's just on the scale mail where I think that's necessary. Otherwise, I think I'm pretty happy with how you've done your positioning and reflection. There is a couple of frames that I caught sight of, though, of the spear tips of some of the other models. If we can flip ahead. Yeah, let's stop here for a sec. Okay. This is super subtle, Robert, but I'll just point it out. So this guy on the left of the screen that you're watching at home has light directionality going in two different angles. So on the top of the blade, it is sort of glancing off to the right, but then on the bottom side of the blade, sort of coming back the opposite angle. Whereas the other spear, the model on the right side of the screen, has those angles coming in the same directionality. And I think that feels more realistic to me. So again, that's a subtlety thing. It's probably not something that most users will pick out, but there you go. Now, what else can we do with gold? You got some spaces where you've got the framing of the shields done in gold. And what I do like about it is that you've got a couple of light bounces on there and light catches on the shield where you have some reflection points. And I think those are done well. They've blended smoothly. But again, I think that's a spot where a greater contrast in a dark space on there would really sell it a little bit better. If you look up at the base of the spear, that looks good. But down on the shield, I think it could use more of that dark shade as part of your gold transition on that space. So that's my comments about the metallics, I suppose. So I guess let's summarize that. Overall, on the silver, done really well. You've got a transition of color. You're going from white to black through your blue tones to give it some color of the world around it. and I like the fact that you've added the blue. I think it's on the scale mail where we need to leave a little bit more shadow to sell that idea a little bit better and to define those scales, especially on the top of the helmets. And on the gold, I think that there's a space where we need to get into the shadowy space a little bit better. You can use more of that to define it. But one last thing in closing, I think that I'd also like to add is, despite all these great features that you've added that somebody will look at once they get close in on your model, the brightness of the yellow doesn't have any variation to it. I will admit that sometimes photography fails to reveal what that really looks like in the yellow and red tone in that spectrum, but I feel like it could use a bit more ochre shadow, especially on the fabric where it's a softer surface and it has folds in there that the light is not going to reflect as much on. So that is one other place that I think you could shadow it more as well, is on your yellow, and tone that down. And that'll give the chance as the user at the first glance, when if Vince, to close out, you want to bring us back to the full unit shot, that'll allow the viewer to start looking at other stuff more sooner in the experience than just seeing the hot yellow coming at them. But overall, I guess in closing, I want to say you've achieved some good things here. Your no metal metallic positioning is fantastic. Just the pushing of the shadows in a few of those spaces and using your darker tones to enrich it is the way to push these to the next step. Good stuff, though, Robert. I appreciate your work.
All right. Let's see. Next up, we've got a wonderful, wonderful little Slayer dwarf from James Wilson. We have some Thousand Sons cultists, and we have a Caspian Cleason brings us a Spirit of Torment. So I'll tell you what, I'll take the cultists. I feel like, Kiran, you've got to do the dwarf. I mean, I don't know who else could do the Slayer dwarf. And then Erik, if you can handle the ghosty boy.
Sure thing.
All right. So let's start with some Thousand Sons cultists. He says the models are mostly done with a dry brush, painted over with inks, and the bases are sculpting clay. He says he'd still like to add some things to the bases to improve the story, but it's quick overall. So it sounds like you were kind of going for more of a sketch style, a little more of a speed paint, and that's fine. So we'll talk about that, or where you could go from here. My general thought is for a speed paint and kind of just doing inks over a type of zenithal. I think you're good. Adding more stuff to the base is a great idea. I mean, they're very flat bases right now, but I totally understand. Sometimes you just got a game and you got to play, so that's all good. So when you think about going forward, I think your ideas are exactly right. Some scrolls and some, just different stuff like that. I would also encourage you to add some tonal variation, have like some, dirt or color or blood or something down there that could occasionally breaks that stuff up. Just, don't go over the top, just a little bit here and there. Really taking these up to the next level, if you come back to them, is just going to be the same story up on the model itself. The purple has some pretty good tonal variation because purple is naturally translucent and so, reacts to a zenithal very well. The other areas are what we would want to work on. So when we look at things like the skin tone, it's very monotone right now. So if you didn't want to get too much red in there, you could do a little bit of purpley red or something like that to get down to the shadows, or some brown red or something like that, along the muscles to better delineate them, especially on some of these figures with, very exposed arms. With the green, I understand you're going for like a pop color that's very bright. It might be overtly so because it is so much stronger than anything else on the model. So you may want to look at like adding a little shade to that or something, or maybe even a few highlights here or there. Just add some variation on that as well. I mean, when you take things to the next level from a sort of ink zenithal, usually the answer is tonal variation, right? That's where you go. You continue to refine and highlight and shadow. And then the same is true on the metal. Like the metals are quite flat. So upping those metals in the same way, add some shades, add some edges, and pick out the rivets on the guns, add some appropriate sort of pigmenting maybe to the end of like the big gun, the guy's carrying up front, that kind of stuff. But overall, I think I think for a speed paint where you're just going for a sketch style, I think these are very, very successful. I think they read, they have nice colors. You balance everything out. Everything looks very well delineated and separated. Everything's very clean. So I think these are very well done within the scope of what you were trying to accomplish at this point in time. All right. Next up, we have this beautiful Slayer Dwarf. So, Kiran, over to you, buddy. Kiran, are you still on mute and talking?
Yeah, of course I am. That's exactly what I'm doing.
There we go.
I said all of the comments I wanted to while I was on mute, James, so I'm afraid I'm done. No, of course, I'm just kidding. Here we go. So let's talk about what I absolutely love about this one. I think that after about 0.3 seconds, any viewer is going to take a look at this axe head and start thinking about how great all the textures are in there. Because it's all carved up on the facing of it, and he's picked out highlights in the right places. But you will also notice that he has pulled in color reflection in appropriate spots as well. So on the facing blade, he brings in some orange to reflect on that high piece, and that is absolutely exactly the right thing to do when you're thinking about the truth of the environment that this guy's in. And I think that works out fantastically. He even brings it up to the top of the axe head where you have a little bit of orange that's fading back onto there, the part that's facing the sky. And then as you move away from it, of course, it goes into more darkness and is just reflecting whatever's around it. Now, the other things that are obviously a big feature of this is all this orange hair going in every direction. And this being the biggest sort of surface capture of the model, and it's maybe best talked about if we take the backside view of this guy. Vince, if you flip ahead one frame, I think we get, or maybe it's 2 frames here. Now, as you get towards, just like I was saying on the other dwarf I was talking about a few minutes ago, when you do that transition, you got to go deep color at the root usually, and then get brighter as you go towards the edge. So on this guy's sort of mohawk mane, he gets into red down there, but I do feel again that it's probably best served if we get into a little bit of brown tone with that, because that will do a couple of things. Because the skin itself is orangey in tone, it'll give you a mild delineation to that. And I'm going to come back and talk about the skin tone here in a second to delineate that further. But for the hair itself, I think going into a real brownish red, or even a chocolatey brown itself at the root of this thing before you start moving up is great. I do like how you've come pretty bright because this is dyed hair, not natural hair. So coming into the orange and yellow spectrum is quite all right for that. Now, other color choices though. You have one gemstone on this guy that is a sort of a ruby color, or even a darker red than that. And if we flip back to the front, we'll see some more gemstones on there. And I think just by the color choice, they tend to get a little bit lost into all this other color. A good counter to orange, of course, is to do blue. When you think about how that works out on the color wheel, the opposite side of the color wheel is blue. So I think that these would have had a lot more impact if you had chosen to do gemstones in a blue or even an azure kind of a green tone. James, I think they would have had a greater impact. Having said that, your execution of them is really great. Like, you've done a subtle, soft transition. You moved through a super dark to the undercut where the light exits. You've followed the same kind of directionality of the light striking on the metals. So you stayed consistent with that, and that is all really good attention to detail on there. So the execution of it's fine. I just think that the color choice would have been better to do something very different than the rest of the model. Now, staying through the blue suggestion, once you start to get into enriching flesh tone and that kind of thing, the undercuts under this guy's cheekbones, within his hands, underneath the armpits, etc., and those dark spaces where there would be shadow, you have to do it very subtly, but you'd actually be very surprised, folks, that a little bit of blue glaze or even green glaze in places like that can really sharpen it up. It's not going to look super obvious that there's green there if you do it subtly. But those are the kind of color tones, James, that I think would enrich this guy's flesh tone a little bit. The front-on look is where I think that's most obvious, because you see his arm in front of him, you get a big, broad, exposed shoulder, and you see the front of the face, and it will frame it against the beard a little bit better, too, when you do that kind of coloration. So, yeah, I think that's probably enough coverage. I think that in closing, I want to come back and circle to the first point you brought up, and that is that your non-metal metallic, I think, is really done very smoothly, and I appreciate the brushed steel kind of a look you got on the blade edge. Your attention to the reflections, I think, is all tremendous. So I think you can be proud of all that part of it. But hopefully there's a couple of things that I've said there you can take away for composition and color definition that might help this guy. A nice piece of work, though.
It really is. He's great. All right. We got a ghosty boy. Are you there, Eric?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
There you go. Now we can.
He's soaking it in.
Sure, that's understandable.
All right. So some of the comments here talking about the purplish skin and that sort of thing. Looking for just some comments and feedback. First of all, looking at this guy, my favorite thing about these models is the opportunity to show different textures, different weights. And I think you've done a fantastic job of giving me a sense that the metal is heavy and the sheets are light. And that's probably a combination of the color choices. The orange rusty brass metallics and such, and then the green getting into even becoming dark and then going to such a light space. So while it's not the cloth and stuff is we're seeing a lot of these blues to greens tones in this. I think you've done a great job of taking it up to the dark, and then the transition in all of this is fantastic. So you've got such a large space to transition from white up to basically a black green. All transitions are really well. And the metal looks just beat up, especially up on his carapace, his shoulder armor, and it's deliciously beat up and rusted and dinged and all that kind of stuff. It does look like you've got a bit of a fat mark, a fat pressed too hard with the silver on the brush in that one spot closest to us. But maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe we can take a look at a couple other angles. So great transitions there. So yeah, what do we got? Oh, so I think it's it's fun. These guys have silhouettes, and in one way they look substantial, and the next they look so insubstantial, which is cool. So for the purple, if we go back to the very first image, we can look very closely at the purple hands. Obviously, there's not a ton of either skin or corporeal elements to this figure, and the hands do a great job of, even in that space and time of traveling from a mid darkish purple up to a mid light purple into the pink, adding some highlights and details on the knuckles, etc. And that works really well in contrast with the green. It makes both of them pop. That little bit of purple adds a lot to making that green, you know, just come alive for the human eye. That said, those two places are the only place we're seeing that purple. And while I understand it's a skin tone, I think it's a perfect tone for working into some of the stone on the base, and you know, kind of just giving that purple another point on the model to be to kind of move the eye around and see those things. And then, as I mentioned, with the armor, a couple spots where on the shoulders where maybe we've scratched it up. Maybe we've scratched it up too much in that, you know, I get a lot of, you look at the locks down below, some of that weathering is more in the verdigris, whereas those should be pretty beat up too in terms of he's swinging those around and hitting people with it. So maybe we could back off the scratches and stuff on the top armor a little bit. But otherwise, I think that you've got fantastic transitions, great color choices, a fantastic feel of weight to like the locks in the metal and lightness to the cloth. And with the shading you have on the hands, they look like they are, if not living, at the very least, you know, flesh. And so it looks really good, really, really good. So thanks for sharing this with us.
Right on. Okay.
I really do appreciate that purple skin. Actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a nice you know, sort of contrast against it. All right, so next up, Thomas brings us some more another ghosty boy, a ghosty boy of a slightly different flavor here.
Yep.
Indeed. Stefan has some brutes, and we have Devin brings us a female sphinx. All right. So let's see. Well, I would really like to take the brutes. Now, Erik, I'm going to give it to you if you want to do two ghosty boys in a row, or whether you, what's that? You do? Okay.
Yeah, I looked at this one too, and it's really nice.
All right, sounds good. So let me jump into the brutes here, and then we'll go to the ghosty boys, and then Kiran, are you all right with the sphinx?
Right. Yeah.
All right. Very different model. So I do love brutes. I've painted these guys, plenty of these guys, and man, I do love them. They are such a fun unit to paint. And these guys look really fun. So here we've got, you can see we've got a couple different loadouts here on our brutes between our top guys who have the sort of reach weapons and the bottom guys who have both choppas. And what we've chosen here, what Stefan has given us is a nice contrast, very classic of sort of green skin and, you know, reddish hued armor. I want to take a moment here to compliment Stefan on a choice he made, which was not to take these guys into a, let's call it a true red. Can often be tempting to go like, oh, well, green and red are complementary, so I'll use green and I'll use red. But of course, orc skin isn't, you know, pure green, right? He's mixed in a lot of yellow. He's using yellow toned skin. And if he had went like with a true bright red, it just would have felt completely overwhelming. Instead, he's gone for this much more muted red. It's more into the orange tone. There's lots of browns in it, stuff like that. It's desaturated. And so I think that looks really nice. So I think my main advice for you, Stefan, when I look at these guys and think, you know, well, what else can we do? Is surprise, surprise. It's our old friend. It's tonal variation. That's right. Here we are. We're back again, as well as a little detailing. So I'll see if I can point this out. We've got things like the fingernails and the teeth that I think could use some more shading near the bottom, give that some more variation. Same with the skin when we get up into the jaws. As well, I'd say pick out some more of these little details that are here. Like this armor is actually magnificently detailed. There's a lot of, you can see these lines in the armor. Having those picked out in some way, those rough edges getting highlighted. You can do it with a dry brush and then a nice glaze over top will keep them in tone, but still have them have a slightly lighter tone like they're catching some of that. We've got rivets on here. I'd love to see those shaded and then picked out. You know, so it doesn't look like the whole thing has just been like matte painted one color. Even if you want to keep the rivets red because he decided to spray his armor red, the rivets would still be creating a shadow or, you know, have something around them. So darkening the circle around the rivets will go a long way. and so then same with their faces. Like their faces themselves are very expressive. They have a lot of like cracks and creases. The brute faces are some of the more expressive orc faces they've ever made. Like they are so rich with detail. And I think you could, really pick some of that out. Really make sure you're using that, bringing some shadows into these cracks and crevices, bringing some highlights into where they're bunching up their scowly face, to really make that pop. Those would be my main pieces of advice that I think jump right out at me. Now, one thing I do want to leave on a compliment here is he is with the basing and the orc's connection to the basing. The basing is nice. He brought a little bit of the red tone in, but he didn't overwhelm it. I think that looks great. That looks like wonderful rusty earth. There's cork under here, but it's so well hidden. He grit over it. It's varied. He's got like lots of different substructures in here, different size grit and rock and sand and mud. Fan freaking tastic work because it looks like earth. It doesn't look like cork. This is how you should do this sort of thing. So absolutely magnificent job on that. The tufts look really nice. They look like part of the scenery. He didn't overuse them. They're just a few placed around to kind of give it the impression of life. And then he pigmented the orc's feet. Like you can see the orcs have dusty feet, as per the world they're in. Always a very minor touch, but such a great touch, especially on things like orcs who would be stomping their big heavy boots all over all over the ground, and they wouldn't take time to dust off their boots before getting in there to duff up to big things. So very, very well done there. It's little touches like that that really make things feel like they live in the world they're in. So fan-freaking-tastic work there. Okay. So Ghosty Boy number 2.
Yeah, so he is looking at an overall army or thinking about a new army, and wanted to get this, picked up this 500 store anniversary thing, and painted it up. He's going for an OSL, some Akshi, some lava and fire. And I think, first of all, this is absolutely stunning in terms of the OSL. And, a lot of what, we're always talking about is how intense that casted light should be. And I feel like he's shown a ton of restraint on how much reds and yellows go into that cloth, to the point of just sometimes it plays with your eyes. You're like, oh, there's some over here and over there. For instance, that shoulder that's closest to us, you can see a distinct place where it goes from kind of that greenish blue into the dark shadow, and even there's a little bit of a reddish orange starting to play in that green. And I think that's a fantastic blend, and just makes it believable, kind of all the elements that are casted down. On this side of it, the other thing I'd say is the opposite. If obviously, I think it's intuitive that if you've got a warm color on one side, you want to invert that with a cool color on the reverse. And so having the cloak be bright and moonlit on the top. And I don't know how much of this is just kind of the photography or the lighting, but I'm really, even though we've got this bleach white background, my eye is really believing this kind of moonlitness of the cloth. And some of that is kind of, again, it's just where he's putting those highlights subtly, obviously up on the shoulder. You get it a little bit down further. And if we go to the next image, Vince, we'll see the back and a few spots where, we get a really bright moonlight hitting. I do think so. A couple of things in that regard. Just real quick, other great things. You'll definitely look at each link in the chain and look at the scythe and the sword, and you'll see great non-metallic metal shading, and that's fantastic. And the tufts on the ground, it's just a little bit there, but look good. They've maybe been shaded, shadowed in a little bit. I'm sure they blend in with the lava or have some reddishness from that lava, which works really well. From this side, again, there's such a softness to the cloth, such a lightness to it. It feels like it's less ethereal and is more tangible, which is a great approach, more like the ring wraiths or something like that. A lot of softness. I do think we could go a little bit brighter on some of the folds that are at the top on this side, but at the same time, I know that I mean, I am almost trusting. I'm like, you know what, I'm probably wrong because it's so such great points all along the way and all over the model. If we go back to the front side, I think my only critique would be to pump up the yellow in the lava. Give me a little bit more bright there, so that I can believe how far it's casting up towards the shoulder and even into the mask. Right now, I feel like the lava is maybe dull enough where I could see it going up a little ways, maybe up to his elbow, maybe something like that. But I feel like if going up to the shoulder and those things, I love the effect. I want to keep that effect, and I would say maybe just make the lava a little bit brighter. And then with that, I think the gravestone probably needs more treatment of this highlight to maybe either be more intense than the cloth. And if that wasn't the case, then maybe that tombstone is more of like an onyx, or bring in kind of the lava or glass or pumice or whatever, darken it up, and maybe make it more of like edgy, reflective glass like. Could be really cool. It would also show off its glass in this case would be just another I guess kind of form of non-metallic metal, but you're going with different kinds of colors, etc. So yeah, so I'm just going to tell you, try and make the stuff look like black glass. That's a really great tip to give people. But no, I think it's beautiful. I love your transitions, the blends, everything, and the subtleness of that shadow up into the shoulder, etc. So some great placement there. If anybody else has any thoughts on this one.
Well, yeah, it's a wonderful light play. I think that he has captivated something pretty sharp there. And what you said towards the end there was my immediate thought is that the source of the light needs to be more intense, because it almost matches some of the reflection. It should always be more intense than the reflection, though.
Yeah, I think that's really I actually completely agree with that. I shouldn't say actually. That sounds like, well, that'd be weird. No, I think you nailed it. I think you're exactly right. Like I think the OSL execution on the guy is darn near perfect. I think it's just the only problem we have is literally with the light not on him, right? That it's a little too weak to be casting such a perfect glow, but like nonetheless, I can picture kind of how the light source should look. And when I think of like how bright that lava is kind of, would be in reality there, as it were, it fits so perfectly with the way that glow is hitting everything, right? Like it just absolutely tracks.
So fantastic display, and have fun, getting started on this army.
Yeah, I agree. This is a great scheme for an army. I think you should absolutely pursue it. Okay. So next up, we have our Lady Sphinx. I think that's technically a Gyno Sphinx.
Yeah, is there a gender distinction in the Sphinx world?
Yeah. Andro Sphinx and Gyno Sphinx.
Oh, well then.
That's a real thing.
I mean, they're not.
So
Sphinxes aren't
done
real.
by Devin. What I thought was kind of cute about his submission is he said this is one of those models that sat on his desk for like a year because he didn't quite know how to finish things off, and so he pointed out a couple things that he finally came to a revelation on, and thank goodness when that happens, right? Like that's some of the greatest experiences when you hit a wall with a model and you just walk away from it, and it ends up being one of those things that just lurks and lurks on your painting desk forever. And when you finally get to a place where you can finish it off, it feels good. So those points were, for Devin, were wings, feathers, and the base structure. So I want to talk about the base structure first because it kind of relates into the sort of composition of the model as a whole. And he's done some sort of, Greek fresco, sort of very faint coloration on the lower parts of that, where he's mixed in some little bit of coral color, some jade, and some blue. And I think that's important to note that he chose those colors to do it, because those are also balancing out with some of the colors that he chose to do on the Sphinx's jewelry, right? So her eyes are framed with an azure blue, and so is her top. She's got a bit of coral around the sort of necklace, and some jade underneath there, and he's brought that down as well. If you flip around, he's got a backside shot where we see a little bit more exposure to that. And I think I think you've done a great, Devin, but the one thing that I would say differently is, by virtue of what you got on the top of the model versus the bottom, I think that you should maybe have chosen to do a little bit more blue down here as opposed to the jade. And that would have balanced out the composition of it better. That's my only comment on that. So I think it's fine otherwise. But while we're on this back shot, let's talk about feathers. So again, by putting a real deep blue at the root of this to define all your feather lines, and then just doing light brushes and brushing over top to build that texture, I think that's worked out great. What I think that you could have done, or rather you didn't need to do, is be absolutely even on your texture from tip to root of all of these feathers. So here's what I might suggest, and you can still build on this if you like the idea, is that on each of these rows of feathers, as you get towards the tip of the feather, you can brush a little bit more heavily, get a little bit more white in there so that it shows less evenness of the striations in between. And you'll create several different levels of depth to these wings, and it'll look more full and more rich by doing that. So again, to reiterate, each row of feathers, just towards the tip of those feathers is where you'll do your brushing. You can do a whole lot more bright as you get to these very long feathers on the final row as it goes to the tip, because it'll frame the model as well while you're doing it. So that's my feather suggestion. If we can flip back around to the front main shot, I got one other couple of bits and pieces that I think I can offer, Devin, that if you want to take this home a little bit further. So first thing is, I want to say you've done some good visual interest on the face by framing those eyes. Like, she's got big, bold eyes with colored pupils in the middle. If you were to dot those pupils even further with a little bit of black, and if you're super careful, I don't know if it's possible on this scale of model, but much like if you look back upon some gemstones that some of the other painters have done, if you were to put a gleam of light right in one little dot in one side of that pupil or one part of the iris, that'll be a really sweet way to sort of sell the idea of the eyes. And that's what people most look at when they look at a model, is they centralize on the face and look at that right away. So if you're fine with your fine super tip brush, and you just get a little bit of dotting on there, and you're willing to try it, I think that'll look really sweet on that. I want to compliment you on your rich golds on this too. But at the same time, because of the shadowing that you have around the gold that frames that, the unfortunate thing is maybe a feature of this model that it's not as sharp in doing the muscular definition of the Sphinx. I think that's the one place that it looks all kind of very flat here. And it's the one thing that stands out against all the other things that you've made great effort to add texture to through your washes, etc. I'm guessing that maybe by the nature of the model and the material it's made out of, you have to force that muscle shape in there a little bit better. So it might be that you have to go back in with some glazes and actually build it up and paint it into those recesses to define that muscle definition. But that's a little bit extra work that maybe you don't want to go to after you've finally made a breakthrough on this model. So let's circle back to that. I think you've done a great job finishing this off. The breakthrough on the idea that you've had for the base material is really good. and I think that the wings, you just need to come back and spend a couple extra minutes, and you'll be able to make those even more full by taking the white back to the tips of the feathers. So yeah, thanks for giving us something unique to look at for this month too. That looks good.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when we get a very unusual figure like this. Like even amongst the Reaper bones, this isn't one you see people often tackle, right? So probably because it is kind of it's a tricky, unusual model. So it's very cool. Very cool to see it in here. All right. So next up we have a Bleep Bloop special. I think we can all take a look at that together, and then I'd like to close us out with Phil Reed, since he's specifically responding to with this figure to some feedback I had given him a couple of months back. So let's all look at Bleep Bloop together, and then I'll close us out on Phil, and we'll go to our intermission. What a show! Okay, so here we go. Indeed, go eat some popcorn, that kind of thing. So Bleep Bloop's at it again. I mean, what do you do? He won. I would like to give a shout out to Bleep Bloop, who won best painted last month at LVO. So,
oh, hooray!
Yeah, that's pretty great. Like, that is a big tournament, by the way. That's like I don't remember how many people actually played in it. 120, 130, maybe more. So to take best painted, to have the best army, is no mean feat. And it's absolutely deserved. We've seen models in this army come to life over time. This is absolutely fantastic. You look at the skulls, you look at the high contrast. He's nailing it on everything. Even the tufts you can tell he started shading the tufts, right? That was some advice we had given him a long time ago. And now I can see that these look much more part of their world now. The swords look absolutely fantastic. So smooth. So wonderful and striking in this contrast. As usual, Bleep runs all the way from white to black on every surface, basically. Just this ultra contrast. He's just controlling the length of the blend. Like on the black, it's mostly black, and then he has this short blend up to a tiny white spot, right? Whereas on the sword, he's got this long, smooth blend from white to black and so on and so forth. So yeah, these guys are great. I honestly don't know that I have much feedback. I have nothing I can say to this, especially for a unit. I mean, it's not, this is army painting. You know what I mean? I mean, what feedback am I going to give here? So if you guys have something you can think of, I welcome it, but I'm honestly out.
Well, I think in contrast to the smoothness you talk about, I think if we're going to niggle a little bit, if that's what we're going to do, and
sure, why not?
In there, I think that there's some parts of the cloaking where the highlight edge comes on a little bit hard for a soft flowing surface of the cloaks. In the black part, the upper part of it, on the flowing parts of it where it's going into that green and that misty minty green, that's all perfectly fine. But in the absolute black space, some of them are a little bit harder than others comparatively. But again, that's only because I'm looking for something to niggle about here, Bleep Bloop, not because I wouldn't be proud of that myself.
Well, I mean, that's something he does a little bit differently, is he pushes contrast in some areas where you're typically not doing that, but he does it so consistently. And again, he pulls that blend so far. And what I think, if I'm going to, rather than trying to find a critique, what I would maybe use as a lesson is that where he's chosen to kind of go from that green to dark for these guys is, I think a lot of people will take that green up to that next layer of cloak, and so it kind of blocks off. Whereas and sometimes with these models, they kind of become a blur of sheets. But I think maybe because of where he's highlighted and because he's or where he's left kind of that the light color and transitioned into dark so early from the bottom, and because he's used those stark highlights, I feel like I can tell the form of each of these guys more distinctly from each other than I can in some units of these guys, if that makes sense. And so if you're dealing with a lot of this kind of variation or a lot of what could be confusion of models because they're wisping in so many different ways. Kind of where they're absolutely distinct. So they're all kind of similar up towards the top, right? They're hunched over their hoods, but focusing on really highlighting up where they're distinct, where their cloth is moving in different directions. That's, I think, a real advantage of how he's painted this unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always a treat though. Like, let's not again, only niggling, but it really is a treat to see this kind of stuff, especially across a whole unit too.
All right, right on.
All right, so let's finish off with before break. What do we got? Some Space Marine fellow.
Yes, we have a Space Marine fellow. Okay, so the basic feedback here was about making the black more visually interesting, and I can tell we're a little overexposed in the photo. Okay, so we want to make sure we back out some of that light in the photo. But I think you do accomplish and answer the previous version here. I remember the previous stuff, and so what we've done here is you've kind of gone for the GW style, like the edge next to the edge style, which is fine. I mean, it does what you need to do here. But I really want to compliment you on the slashes and hashes that you've put on here. To make those realistic, they have to be of lots of varying lengths. They have to be, sort of quite random, and they have to be ultra thin. And you really accomplish that. So I think that's good. I think you might, it's a stylistic choice, but you may want to think about a slight gray, like right here, like move this black up one slight tone here, 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 right where it's really pushed out into the light, right? Like right where he's really exposing that, like this shoulder is directly catching whatever light. So like if it's anything's going to be lighter and not read as true black, it's going to be this right here, right? But overall, I think you did a good job. It's definitely much more visually interesting. You certainly succeeded on that. I also want to compliment you on the skin tone. I think that looks really nice. I think that's real rich. You've got some nice shadows in there. You're popping out the highlights on like the nose and the cheeks and stuff like that really well. One small note is just on the steel. When you're going to run very black armor, find a way to make the like these tubes and stuff like more visually interesting. Maybe that means adding some color to them through some rusty, crusty goodness or something like that. If you want to keep them clean, then pop them out, make them look more matte, or make them look, if they're going to be metallic, then put really strong light reflections along of like silver light reflections, like going along all these little ridges. So they really pop out. Like there's, a lot of different ways you could go. Just look for a way to sort of visually differentiate them from the rest of the black armor so they don't just kind of fall into the miniature itself. But other than that, and then as I mentioned before, look at this. We have little red pigment on his feet. Good job. It's such a minor thing, but I notice it every time when it's not there, and I notice it when it's there. I always notice feet because it jumps off the mini. So well done.
And on the skulls too.
Yeah. That's such a good point. Thank you. Yes, excellent. A lot of times I'll see people place skulls in environments that just look untouched by the environment around them. And I'm like, did somebody just literally drop that skull there a minute ago? Right? Like if it's there for even a day, it's going to have dirt and dust and crap on it. Right? So yeah, agreed. All right.
Good pick on that, Philip.
Yes. Very good point. All right. So we're going to take a little break. And we'll be back in just a moment after we get our coffee, shower, maybe change clothes randomly. Who knows? But we'll be back. All right. We're back. Ready to continue. PmP review part 2. We've, showered, shaved, etc. We're ready, refreshed and ready to go. We did lose Erik. He got sucked into the warp, sadly. It was miscast and he was gone, but he'll be back. I'm sure we'll fish him back out, although he may be changed. But Kiran, are you ready to continue on?
Yeah, I survived the magical onslaught and came back.
All right.
Off the perils.
Indeed. Glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. All right. So let me share up here. Okay. So we start off with Spartan David and a little fire glaive, and then we have Andy Walker and a skink. Would you like the skink or the fire glaive?
Let's talk about lizards. You can talk about.
All right, sounds good.
Angry midgets.
Okay. All right.
Easy to say, is it? I'm starting off poorly.
They're chaos dwarves. I don't know. I don't even know if that's the right name anymore. Who knows? Anyway, let's talk about these little guys. They're always fun. I've always liked like the sharp lines and stuff of their armor. So here we'll take a look at the whole unit overall. Looks really nice. I like the bright red color. I think that's, there we go. Very striking. I like the blue pop of the sort of, their eyes and on the guns and stuff. I think that's a real good pop color. So I think that's well executed. Make sure I'm locked on myself. I think I am. Yeah, I am. Okay. Sorry about that. And I like the choice of the bases. I think those look good using like the sort of machine sector imperialis bases or whatever from 40K. I think that actually works fine in the case of Chaos Dwarves, where you've got to picture them marching around in these massive forges, the industry and such. So that's okay. My biggest pushback for you here is going to be just on the variation in the red. And it's always possible that I'm just not seeing it because cameras often, especially when they're yellow tinged light like this is, often cut out tonal variation, but especially in reds. But that's what I would say. My main pushback here would be to sort of really push your reds. Get some deeper shadows down in like this area here. Like pick a side of the helmet and shadow to it. Like in this case, light's coming down like this. So have this side of the helmet like up to the ridge, like come into a deeper shadow, and then have it broaden here on the reflected light. Have this be the brightest highlight here and have this part be in shadow. Just a choice like that, right? Kind of pushing the variation in the red a little more. Doing things like hitting the rivets. That's the other thing I noticed. Like these rivets on his head aren't picked out. So like same with his fingers, just more like detailing, panel lining of like getting darkness in here in between this ridge around these rivets and then hitting them with a little highlight so they pop a little more. That would be my main piece of feedback. Overall, I mean, I understand it's a unit. I don't know how many fire glaives you're doing. Could be like a really big number. But I think the metals look good. We could have a little more variation on the steel and the guns, but they're fine. And I think the color choice and the composition is really nice. I like the rust on the bases, by the way, to keep it in tone. I think that's a really good touch. So I'd say just pushing the red, since it's the dominant color, into a little more contrast is where you'd want to go. But overall, very cool, Spartan. I dig them.
I like the phalanx formation that he's displayed him in here too.
Absolutely. Yeah. As appropriate. All right. Let's talk about some skink.
Andy tells me that this is a prototype for a mob of skinks that he's going to need to do, 40-ish. So at first glance, good. It's a striking color combo, mainly pale blue skin with the purple scales. And I think if you got to do 40 of these things, you got to stay something simplistic. These little shields that they're toting around, though, that you've done in this sort of brownish red, that's the one thing that I might think about a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is we have sort of a color wheel, color spectrum balance going on here with what's otherwise a pretty cool color in the blue and a very cool color in the purple, and then this warm red. I think that you don't necessarily need to go that far red. You could stay closer to a purple and maybe make it a little bit more dingy. It still will read as scales. It doesn't have to be exactly the same tone that you've done on the backs of these guys, because those are living scales on a real moving creature. Whereas obviously your shield is full of dead scales. So they might, flatten out a little bit, get a little bit more pale, something like that. But I think that's my first glance idea would be shields in the purple spectrum, because we talk about sort of color balancing and transition and scale and that kind of thing a fair bit. What the shield does is it detracts a little bit from the model, because it's a feature that's right up there up front, and it's the only thing that's red, aside from a couple little touches on a bracelet he's got in his other hand, but you have to really go looking for that. It also is not a color that comes down and reflects on the base either. So let's flip through. He's got a couple of shots here, and we can talk about the quality of the paint layout, that kind of thing. I think the read on the skin and the musculature is good. It's pretty smooth. The scale shaping is also good. You've managed to keep it dark so you get the very distinctive segments between each of the scales. And that's the kind of thing you want for a tabletop display of 40 plus of these things. So I think you should be happy with whatever formula and processes that you're doing to get all that skin layering down and built up. So be happy with that. Maybe the other thing we can talk about is let's get a quick look at his baton, I want to call it. So you get another shot where we get a side view of that. Yeah, it's a pretty simple thing, but you've got gold in a couple places. He's got it around his neck. I think some of these, not this particular skink, but if I remember right, there's a number of the skinks in this unit that you buy that have little dangles off of the shield bucklers and ankle bracelets and things like that are also gold. So that'll give you some triangulation when you look at it overall over the whole unit. The last thing I want to bring attention to is the classic eye with the yellow color, a little bit of a slit there for lizardy eyes. But one thing that I would add about the eyes, just before we finish off, is you can create a little bit of motion in the eye and a little bit more aggression into a model. And this is a super subtlety, but if you move that eye slit a little bit more forward on the eye, it doesn't need to be dead center, then you will actually project some more motion into this model and make him look like more of an attacking skink rather than a standstill skink. So try that out on a couple of your models, see if you like it, but it could certainly add a little bit more flavor to it. And then one last finishing thing that again is another sort of repeat mantra that we have on the PmP is drop a little bit of brownish color into your tufts of grass. Whether that be a little bit of wash, you just put it in there as a droplet so that it doesn't look so clean and tidy coming out of that muddy ground that it's growing out of. And that'll feel a little bit more realistic across the board. Yeah. So there you go. Good prototype. And hopefully one or two of those things that I mentioned can translate across the whole mob of them as you keep going. Absolutely.
All right. So next up, we've got Thibaut, who brings us a big tank, the Blight Crawler, and Edson, who brings us a wonderful bust. I'd love to take the bust if that's okay. You mind if I start off on that?
Go ahead.
All right. So he said he's posting here for comments, tips in general, but more specifically, he's asking about the directional light effect and the color composition. Okay. And he says that he, feels he made a mistake by using a green for the baby wraps on top of the bluish tones, the rest of the model. Okay. So let's take a look. So first of all, I think this is really, really, really well executed. And I'll give you my personal feeling is I don't think that the green is a mistake. I actually think the green is perfect. It's interesting because I wonder about the need to color balance it, and that you kind of hit it in a few places in her hair, right? In between the braids. And I'm not sure what that's reading as. Like we can see that it's like here and here and here and here. And that's interesting. I don't know that it's out and out necessary because that should just be her hair in those braids. I'm not sure. Like, I don't think it's a different thing trapped in there. But I mean, if I'm wrong, correct me. I actually really like the red over here on these feathers. I think that's really nice. So, I mean, the story that this tells me, knowing nothing about what this bust is trying to capture, is this old lady is kidnapping this kid. Okay. And I get that solely based on the color composition. Now, that's because the kid is all in green and red and life. Like this is all life colors and this is all death colors. I would have honestly, if we're going to talk about the directional lighting, I would have cooled it just a little more on her. Over here on this side, your shadow is so wonderful. Maybe a little light blue subtle reflection here would be nice. But I mean, this is really good. your light is very yellow and warm on her face. I maybe would have cooled it down just a scotch over what's here. Make it feel like almost as though the child itself is emanating or catching more of the light. Because what it feels like is happening is you've got this older sort of witch stealing a young child, right? Which is life, death kind of thing, right? So catching that in the color variation, I think could make a big difference. Now, that being said, it's such a minor compositional detail, but I really love what's going on here. You did a great job on so many little elements I want to talk about. Baby's hair looks nice, very straw-like. I like the fur and the variation, the capture of a little bit of the colors in here. I like the soft purples and reds around here in that. I think that's a really nice touch. Also counterbalanced by the shadows here on this side of the baby's head. Maybe wheel those back just a scotch, like that are a little strong on this side, but it's a minor touch. The patterning and the texturing looks really, really good. I dig the heck out of that. Their eyes look wonderful, and you placed them so well. Like the old sort of crone here looking up and mischievous when we reveal the bottom of the eyes, we get this mischievous look when we see the white. Whereas the baby who's looking dead center goes back to what you just talked about, Kiran, with the eyes, right? The baby looking like dead center and straight ahead, it sells this like look of just sort of complete befuddlement as to what's going on, right? Imagine like, viewers, if you took these eyes and you put them over in the corner, so the baby was looking up at the crone, it would completely change their relationship, right? Neither of them are looking at each other. That creates a distance in their relationship right away. Yeah. So just little minor touches like that can go such a long way. Other tiny nitpicks are like maybe a little more cracking in her lips to kind of show more age and stuff like that. Just a little bit more, especially here where it's caught by the light, where we would see the aging and cracking in the lips. But that's a super minor touch. Like everything else on this is really wonderful. I love the color in the veins of her hands. I love the color capture in the flannel, down here in the hair, like the way we're capturing and working through the light that's being captured in her sort of gray to dark hair. I think that's all fantastic. So it's really good. You could probably, looking at the full piece, I think the directional lighting absolutely works. I think you could probably darken this part a little more. Take this shadow down. Like when I'm looking at the full piece, you have such a strong focused light here that this feels like it should be cast in a little more shadow. Just a minor touch to really, really sell the effect. You wouldn't notice it from a front-on view, obviously, but if somebody's taking it and spinning it in their hands, it would continue to sell the effect even when not in a stable image. But this is really, really top-notch work, Edson. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. So, yeah.
Yeah, tremendous piece.
It really is great. I love the warm yellow light countered by the cold shadows in this case. It's great. Okay. Thank you for sharing it. This is great. I'm honored that you shared this with us. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Okay.
We're gonna look at gross stuff next.
Yeah, right? Now after something so beautiful, let's look at some grossness. Not in the badness of the paint job. It's a very good paint job. It's just we're bringing on the Nurgle.
True. That's absolutely true. So Thibaut's done this this Nurgly juggernaut tank. Excuse my 40K lingo, people at home.
I believe it's a blight crawler.
Blight crawler. Of course it is. All right. Well, so obviously the first thing that everybody's going to notice about this is how battle worn and weathered it is. And that's probably what we're going to spend most of our time talking about. The application and the subtlety of paint moving through green and brown and dark colors, I think is handled pretty well. He's done some sort of panel modulation, as you can see around that. The rimming of the track, for example, is probably where you see that best, and we'll get a couple of shots where we'll soak that in a little bit better in a second. But I think that's handled really well. He's paid real close attention to environmental effects, like not only the mottling that goes on, in battle damage where it's deflected bullets and burn and scorch marks, but all that grit and grime that is being picked up by the shovel at the front. I think that reads really well. The gun barrel's got some verdigris, and his brass framing also does. So he's paid attention to a lot of things here. In his focus shot that's on the right of your screen, he's also done a lot to reinforce the gouge marks and cutaways and you know, the bigger rents and deeper cuts that are into this model. And I think that's handled for the most part pretty well. But let's go to a couple other shots, and we'll talk about some things that we could work on and improve at. Now, when I look at this thing overall, one of the things that Thibaut mentioned in his comments here is he was wondering about the, how did he put it? I can't recall, but more towards the way of, you know, does the color stand out of all this weathering? Is it noticeable enough aside from just a color shift? And I think that in a lot of cases it certainly does, but there's two ways that I think that you could push that even further and get a greater distinction between your rust areas and your other scorch areas. So what I mean by that is, for example, right on the top of the shovel, where you can see a bit of the tank track feeding into its cowling, he has left that very sooty and dark. And he's done that on the back end too, by the way, which we'll see in a later frame. And then he's got on the front of the tank, where it goes over its curving, deflecting part, there's streaks of scorch marks that are there that are only a little bit dark and could probably be a little bit darker. So that's one spot, I think, is where you're putting scorch marks, or where you imagine that it's been, you know, deflected a blast, or there's been fire dropped onto it. That could get a little bit more sooty and a little more charcoaly. The other thing that I thought of is, being a Nurgle tank, this has lots of pock marks that are not necessarily bullet holes, but whatever contagion grows on their living metal or their organic bits. So on the shovel, there's a big cluster. There's several big clusters of it. And in other places along the front, there's also big clusters of it. What if these went a little bit more yellow, right? To really define that and make it look like it's sort of an area of diseased, poxy mess. You know, not a bright yellow, obviously, but it's sort of staying in the same vein of these sort of muted colors of an ochre. And you could sort of frame all that area generally and do like a soft blend, like you've done from the green through the brown, and leave that as an ochre color. I think I like that perspective, and you could bring that forward as a bit of a bigger feature. It could also be a color that plays in nicely with the brass that you've done through the rest of this. So let's go to another side shot, next shot. If you would, Vince, thanks. So coming at the back end of this, the other thing that we wanted to talk about, and we'll maybe have to go back to the front frame for this in a second, but I'll talk about the brass just for a moment on here. I think in a lot of these cases, whether it's the way that the photography takes it, being the metallics or not, I think that brass could also have some sharper edging to it. I understand that you want to stay pretty dark with it because of the lightness of this green around there. That's good. But I think the edging of it could be a little sharper in several spots. And then that will be contrasted a little bit more by your verdigris that you've done on that too. The thing that I want to bring people's attention to is all these cogs and the wheels that are going on within the track. So I think that rusting on that kind of stuff looks good. He's come to a bright silver in some spots where obviously it's freshly been scraped away, because although they will get mucky and they'll get dirty, as they continue to roll, they'll shed that stuff, or they'll make new scrapes on it to get down to raw metal. So I appreciate, Thibaut, that you have paid attention to that, but left the inner workings where there's less moving parts darker and more scummy. Also, the same applies to the track itself. So right on the edge of the track, you've got some exposed metal still, but yet in the center of the track is where muck has built up, and that's going to stick there for a little bit. So I think that looks all fantastic, and it feels realistic. So to finish off, let's pop back to the front, the main photo again, where he gives us a close-up of his freehand work that he's done on there. So he's got those two different instances. I think this reads pretty sharply. The skull itself, that shows up well from a distance. You can see it from the further away shots behind the guns. This Nurgle symbol on the top, though, from the angle that you've taken it from, it looks a little bit confusing and it's a little bit tight, especially because it's laid over that exact spot where all those pockmarks are as well. I think that looks a little bit confusing, but yet choosing a place for that to be otherwise, without all those pockmarks, I think the only other place it could be is shifting over to the other panel, but then it's competing with this sort of three-barreled gun that comes out the front. So I don't know if it fits there. Maybe it just needs to be bigger and like fill that panel from top to bottom to make it a little bit more defined within the scale that you're working with. Because you certainly got a lot of transition of color in there. But yeah, I don't know if I have the solution for you on that one. I think the positioning is working against you more than anything. But overall, you sold me on the idea that this is a very gritty tank. It's in its very realistic environment. It's seen some battle. It's going to see some more. But I think you've done some really good things with weathering. And my only critiques were, sort of color choices to pull out some different aspects and elements of those weathering to make them distinguishable from the different styles of damage and decay that are going on in this model. So again, hopefully some of that comment works for you, Thibaut, and we can, you made mention that you got another one to work on, so I'm sure we'll see that in a month or two and see what's different.
Absolutely. Yeah, looking good. Okay. So next up, let's see. We've got 2 from the Bringer of Rain, and then more Nurgle vehicles. Wait, maybe these are the Blight Crawlers, and maybe this one's different. Sure, that's fine. I'll take both from the Bringer, and you can keep going on Nurgle. How's that sound? Okay. Well, we'll break it up. I'll start out here with these 2, and then we'll let you swing back to Nurgle. All right. So we start with Bringer of Rain, who says, he feels like he's taking a step with these. He's taking his time. He's not rushing. Good. So this time he's been painting using, or he says, I've been painting using poor brush technique. I still slip back and always, but now I'm catching it, trying to stay conscious of what I'm doing. Okay. So, let's take a look. Loading. There we go.
It's always the trouble with heavy pictures.
Sure. Okay. So there we go. This is probably the best shot. So it's a tricky model to say much about because it's pretty simple. I guess my feedback for you would be, what are you going for with it? Because it's all like, I assume you wanted like a shadow demon type of thing where it's all just sort of black and smoke and stuff like that. And if that's the case, then I think you probably still need to push it a little farther. The old rule that applies here is, and like this is you've chosen like one of the toughest things to paint. Gray is just adding white to black, hence it goes chalky really easy. It's hard to get smooth transitions. You're running the entire gamut from black to white, hence it's going to be the longest and slowest thing to transition and that kind of thing. But what I would say is you need some more focused light. So like when you've got a piece like this that doesn't have much on it, you need to tell a story through it. So like right now, his face is very dim. Whereas what should be bringing out the most highlights is right here in this area. That way I'm forced to look here. But like the hand has very little highlights on it, that kind of thing. This is mostly in just black, which could be fine. Like one of the ways you could do this is you could almost have like the face and the upper torso and this part of the neck almost over highlighted into the gray. And then you let the hands drift off into like pure black to kind of get those edges or something like that. Conversely, a little bit of some kind of a color. Like I understand you were probably trying to stay somewhat monochromatic, but some kind of very weak color. Bring a brown red into the gray transition or into the low tones, the black shadow or something like that is probably your best bet. But I think mostly what I would want to say is, when you've got a model that's all the same, there's not a lot of critique I can give you on various techniques, except to say it's all composition. Like the name of the game here is just composition. So you've got to like pop the center out, pop the face out, tell a story through the paint. Okay. Now the next one you did, we can probably have a little more feedback on. Okay. So let's take a look at this guy. All right, because I feel like this is probably a pretty good piece to do it once we focus. There we go. All right, so here I think you've got a good skin tone down. I think that looks nice. With the black, again, like you're choosing to paint a lot of black, and black is one of the hardest colors to paint. So you are setting yourself quite a challenge here. Because black is very subtle. At least 50% of it needs to stay true black, but the other part needs to then go up to sometimes very high highlights, even white, depending on what the material is. Like black leather has a ton of white in it, right? It's just still 50% black. Whereas black wool has like some very light gray at its highlight, right? And has very broad, slow highlights, whereas leather will go suddenly sharp and sheen. So the point is that you got to really think about your material and stuff like that. Black is just a very complicated color to paint. Now, skin tone wise, it looks good. I like the shadow. I like the inclusions of the different colors in here. Where I think you need to work, focus your work is on really getting the sort of musculature cut out and stuff like that. Like I like the red, the wounds that you're going for and that kind of thing. Like he's been in a fight. That's cool. But a little more like, again, shadows in between the fingers. I always notice when people don't shadow their fingers. Knuckles, like these should be catching more light here, especially on Bruce Lee. We want to make sure his fist is sort of an area of attention because, it's kind of what Bruce Lee's all about is, that punching people. It's you don't want to get punched by Bruce Lee, obviously. But, and then again, same with like the cheeks, the nose, probably up here on the pectoral muscles. It looks like this is highlighted well. I'd see maybe this pec is okay. Maybe just a little more on the arms here, that kind of thing. And then just kind of like work on building both the shadow and the highlight. I think the skin is really good though. A little bit of deeper shadows, maybe here in the pec or here on the sternocleidomastoid where it like really gets deep in the neck muscle. But for the most part, I think you've got a nice skin tone, nice wounds, nice sort of, it's good. We just need to sort of take it up a little bit more. Okay. So those are my thoughts. Hope that helps.
It's the first time we've had Bruce Lee up here on our PmP, I think.
I know. What a way to send it off. That's great. Yeah, I'm so excited. This is a really cool piece. I dig this, man. And I really like what you achieved here with the tone. One thing to think about is maybe making the belt an alternate color too. Could be an interesting way to add a little bit more color into the model. Like you could make his belt and his shoes some color. I mean, it's fine. You don't need to match some exact historical thing that Bruce wore necessarily. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Blight Haulers. There you go. I don't know if that's the other one was called or not.
Yeah, I'll trust you.
Well, I don't know. This is different than the tanky thing, but I don't know which one's which, so doesn't matter. Somebody's yelling at their screen right now and is very angry at us, but sorry.
Actually, it says Blade Haulers right there in the description, so we'll go with that. We'll assume that Tim knows exactly what they're called since he painted them.
I trust him. He seems like a trustworthy guy.
Good. Alrighty. So this happy trio of nerdly fun. I am curious about a couple things before I discuss anything. Are these worms on the base? Is that what that is? Those are like some sort of rust worms?
I think so.
That's exciting. Okay. Exciting and weird. Anyway, that's not why we're here. Well, there's a few striking things about these models that I want to talk about. First off, I'm kind of attracted to the fact that it's got these little set of teeth and claws that come out of the front, and then these sort of tubules that pop out of the top, and the way that that's balanced on the model is kind of a big feature for me, despite the fact that he's got these glowing eyes and nodes in the center of it with some metal framing. But I'm attracted to those first, and I want to say that I think I like the way that you've done those. You've moved through a bone to a darker color as it goes to the tip. There could probably just as a sort of sharpening up of the segments of those claws that are on the other side. Maybe one little touch lighter to really define those would be a small thing to sort of push a feature forward. I may be overstating it. That's what I see as a feature. Maybe you don't, but redefining those a little bit better is one thing that I would give a tip to. Now, as far as the kit and the armor plating, I think you've achieved something pretty good by making it a smooth application of color all the way. But that is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because what I mean by that is getting it to achieve a nice smooth overall color is hard to do with a pale white. I understand this is a little bit of bluish gray touched into it, but even still, that's difficult to do overall. When we look a little bit closer, I see that what you've done around the edges, around the rent marks and the pock marks and the holes and stuff, is you've done some wash in there to move the color a little bit, and also around any place that there's metallic joining into it, you've pulled that off as an edging. Now, the thing that I will kind of want to go here is one of two ways. If what you're trying to read into that, or sell us on the idea of, is that is a metallic that has pulled away and is rusting, then I think that can go a little bit further to do that. That would read a little bit differently. Or alternately, my other thing before I talk about that deeper is, if you were trying to make this metallic look a little bit more organic, like it is a chitinous material that is sort of moving out of, this sort of same chitin that you've got on these teeth and tubules at the top. Now, if that's the way that you're going, the latter, that's the one that I would actually be more attracted to, and I think the way to lean into it a bit more. So he's got in his next shot an overtop one, Vince, and let's maybe use that to talk about what I'm about to get into here. Okay. Yeah, so from this shot, let's take a closer look. He's got a little bit of a banding where one chitin transfers into the next one, and a little bit of that wash, that sepia color is helping with that to define that transition and where one plate ends and the next one begins. But regrettably, because it's done with the wash, it sort of has pooled in some places and given you that bit of a coffee stain look, and it hasn't transitioned as smoothly because it's trying to be too subtle. I think if you do want to move that way, Tim, where you're making this look chitinous and there's some sort of organicness to that, you'll actually have to get some more opaque paint and make that transition where it moves from that ochre sepia color and then transitions towards your pale blue gray as you do that, and favoring the spots where it's meeting that metal framework, of course. And then if you do that, you can leave your pock marks and your scrape rents exactly as they are. That would be perfectly fine. But I hope you catch your meaning. I don't know if what I'm explaining is reading across properly, but what I'm talking about is moving again from the edge of it up through ochre. So it's got to be that at its root as it moves into the blue gray. So that means, I guess if we flip back to the front here for a sec, I'm struggling to illustrate this because I'm pointing at my screen, but you can't see me, people at home. I wish you could. So what I'm talking about is if we start at the base of this, where there's that metal frame around the bottom of this metal plate, the very front center one, if that starts as an ochre color, and then as it's starting to crest and turn over top, approximately where just before that one rent or the pock marks begin, you're starting to move into the gray, and you end up virtually white by the time that you get to the top at the back of this. Then you start again on the next segment with a bit of ochre and move up into white, etc. Right, on those three panels at the center. And then similarly on these two panels on each side, similarly you're starting at the bottom in ochre and moving up, and you end up white at the top. That's simply what I'm getting into. So that's my idea for these guys. If you're doing more of them, to give it an organic look. And the one other thing that I would suggest is on each of these sort of lenses that appear on the model, I can see that you've done a little bit of spot highlight on the top to show where the light's coming in. But take a look at some other examples that we've had in the past of where light, what really reads well, even though it's kind of fake, is the gemstone look on these kinds of things, where you have a bit of a light escaping from the bottom as well, where you have a sort of a half moon curl on the opposite side of where you put your highlight marks, your white highlight marks. And that usually reads pretty well. And that'll sell that little idea a little bit more and give it a nice feature in the middle. I do like that you've chosen green to do that, because it plays off nicely on all this extra stuff that you've done in the base works. So that slimy muck underneath this crumble of concrete, and these rust worms are a cool little addition. So the bases are intriguing, and they're exciting, and it looks like the world that these things live in. So kudos on that stuff, Tim. But yeah, I think I've given you enough there. I hope I've explained it well enough that it's something you can take away.
Right on.
That's all I got for that.
Okay. They're cool vehicles. They really are neat to sort of experiment with. Okay. So let's see. Red Wizard brings us a Exalted Deathbringer. Says he's looking for some general tips on how to on how to take to the next level. And then Rinfire brings us an update on his this is one of the Primarch dudes, right?
Yeah, it must be.
I don't know which one it is.
Because I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know what any of their names are. This guy doesn't look like a nice guy. I don't know. All right. So do you want me? Which one would you like to take? Do you want Primarch guy, or do you want the Exalted Deathbringer?
I will talk about this Deathbringer, I think.
All right. So let me jump into a Primarch guy here. Okay. So he says he used some liquid gold, and he rated the face and the skin on the cloak. So with that in mind, let's take a look, focusing on those areas. Okay, so the gold is very nice, very bright. So I think that works, well. Liquid gold always has an incredible bright, true goldness to it. Oh, this is the dude with this is the death guy. I don't remember what his name is, but yeah, okay. Anyway, I remember seeing this guy in art. What I would say is, so in general with this, when you've got a lot of this bright gold, we still need to get control of the shadows. So like we need to take some sepia tones, purple tones, sepia ink, purple ink, something like that, and get these areas where they would be shadowed. So like I'll give a very simple but easy to sort of recognize example. Here in this shoulder area, like the tops of this right here should be heavily shadowed, and this bottom should be silver. Here on the center of his thing, there should be like some part of this that's brown coming up to a highlight here. On this knee plate, if the light's coming in like this, then up to here should be shadowed. This should be silver going out, right? And so on and so forth. Like you really want to, when you're using this gold, you want to make sure you're really taking full control of the light and shadow, right? Like the liquid gold is really nice because it does give you this beautiful metallic sheen, but we've still got to do some additional work to bring it up there. Now, on this guy's face, it seems very hidden, and so it's probably tough to do much on it at this point. I do like the lighting scheme you went with. You shadowed this side of the face quite heavily, which is good. So maybe the light's coming from this direction or whatever. That's fine. Then reverse what I just said. But so I actually like that because he's got this big shoulder that's stopping the light from getting in. So I think that's actually really nice. He looks very, very, very dead. I don't know if he's actually supposed to be a zombie, but that's what he looks like right now, or a vampire or something, like a true vampire. But even then, I'd expect some kind of color tones in his skin, and that's what I'm really not seeing. So I would look at, like, can we get a little bit of life back in there? Something. Like, I understand he's this Night Lord dude probably, and so supposed to look pretty dead. But just, like, a little bit of even deep purples, or it's not going to make him look like a normal human, but it'll bring the idea that he's not a just literal corpse to it, right? a little bit of color tone like that is generally helps sell that image. Now, as to the cloak and the skin, like, which is, you know, this clearly flayed skin and skulls and stuff, I think that's fine. I think the pinky tone sells. You may want to take it up into a normal flesh tone at some points, like here on the edges. Have this come out to more of a sort of traditional Caucasian skin tone, if that's what this is meant to be, or whatever. But like, give me some strong edges, give me some shadows. Again, like if he literally flayed somebody, I would expect there to be cuts and bruises and stuff like that, so we can work in some purple tones. Mottling generally looks good on that kind of flayed skin because it's not going to come off easily, right? So skin is kind of attached. Assuming he shredded it off with these big claws, there's going to be cuts and scrapes and bruising and stuff like that because it came off when there was still blood flowing and muscle attachments and ligaments being ripped and all, you know, all sorts of capillaries being exploded all over the place. So the point is that it should look like it got beat to living, you know, and back while it was being taken off. So that would be my having some higher highlights where it's still very skin-like, and then having mottled sections of bruising and wounds and stuff like that can go a long way. So there you go. That's my advice. Hope that helps. Very cool piece, though.
I would add to that I've seen a few artists pull off this kind of flayed, freshly dead skin by putting a little bit of green.
Oh yeah, sure.
Over there too.
Yeah, yep. It's a little bit of green can go a long way on sort of dead skin, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that it's kind of started to go to rot just a little, right? Because I don't think that guy properly treated that skin.
Did not oil of Olay.
Well, no, definitely not. All right, to the Red Wizard.
Yeah, so I got something from Red Wizard here. And so what he just simply asked in here was some general overall tips about how to improve upon a place that he's at right now. Well, I think that your groundworks are all great here. Let's talk first off about color composition and layout. I think that balances out well. You got red in the right places, you got silver in the right places, they triangulate, and then you've got this motion top to bottom of your brightest color being that bone color, which brings your eye from the top right down to the floor as well, because you even got a couple of well-placed skulls here on the base works. Now, focusing on the central part, which is probably where the viewer's eyes will go next, this sort of purple skin tone that he brings into here that moves into a bit of a mauve color. I think that's where I want to start talking, because when we look closer at this thing, and especially when we get a back view shot, I think what I'm detecting out of this is that you're having that unfortunate struggle that most of us do, is when you go into building up a new highlight and getting into a new color, you're adding white to it. And white tends to get chalky. And regrettably, it reads a little bit that way on this guy. So ways to alleviate that, you got a couple of paths, or maybe both. One is that you can, instead of adding just pure white pigment paint, if you have access to my new friend, the white artist ink, to move your color a little bit, it's smoother. It doesn't chalk up quite as much, and it adds a little bit of a liquid flow to your model, to your paint as well, without doing that. So that's one path, and it's just on my mind recently because I've been using it more myself. But of course, the other way you can do things is you can use your mid-tone purple and add a glaze medium to it, and sort of pull it all a little bit closer together by doing some overall glazes on the top part, so that it doesn't appear as chalky. It'll sort of bring that down a little bit without ruining entirely all your works of doing a highlight. But of course, you have to be careful with the mix of that, so that you're not putting it on so it's opaque and obscuring all that fine muscle definition that you've worked hard to achieve on this kind of guy. So that's a couple tips there. The other thing that I really do enjoy, and I think you've captured well, is your contrasting the red. So both on that tabard as well as the tassels that are hanging from his headdress, I think you've nailed that. It does really work from a rich, deep red, almost brown, and come up to a bright red without going into anything yellowy and looking Ronald McDonald House. So that's good. I'm glad that you've done that. But while we're staying on the red and talking about it, this is something I rarely find myself saying, but this is one of those cases where I'm actually gonna ask you, Red Wizard, to put more gore on this guy's blades. You have a pool of blood down at his feet, running off the edge of the stone, but only faint hints of it have actually stuck to that blade up there. So get out your blood for the blood glot, or whatever kind of globby medium that you use, and get it along that edge of the blade, and even on the claw hand on the opposite side if you like. If you're brave and you want to add some more realism to it, you could have some that's splattered along his right flank and onto his pants down there, because he would have chopped something, and there was obviously some blowback from a big giant axe like that. So yeah, if you feel brave about that, give it a try. I think it'll add some more realism to it. But the other thing that I want to talk about too is, let's talk about the metallics overall. So throughout this model, you have used the same kind of metallic on leg greaves, headdress, axe, and claw hand. And I think that's where it needs a little bit of framing variation. Korn famously gets into the brass, and I think that's what I'd recommend here, is you get out your other sort of spectrum of metallics and the framework of this axe, because it's got lots of great framework, not only along the top and bottom, but it's got a, you know, that spike and skull motif in the center, and it also has, when we see it from the back, you'll also notice there's the base piece of the axe haft could be different as well, and then it also benefits from having these greaves, the framework of those greaves and the framework of the headdress in a different metallic as well, and I think that would benefit from getting into the brass bronze neighborhood. If you are totally against adding a second metallic color to it, then we have to get into a study a little bit harder of doing real contrast metallics, where you're going from almost black at the root of some of your facing of the axe, before you get into the sharp edges, to be that real sort of mithril glistening silver. And maybe you want to experiment with that anyway. Kind of done in the same 2D style, if you've ever looked at non-metallic metal and observed how they go from black to white. There's no reason you can't think of real metallic in the same way. And I know that Vince has done some vids about this under a couple of color spectrums, and so have many others. But you still, even in real metallic, moving from absolute black, or very near black, I should say, into a bright silver, is still a transition that's worthwhile doing to sell the idea. But you have to be a student of reflection and where the light hits and where it would not catch, or where it pools, and that takes lots of reference material. But I think that would certainly be something within the realm of your next steps to bring life to your big heavy metallic axe and the other places that are metallic on this guy. Yeah, so there's a few things to think about. Hopefully that can give you some push forward. If you want to revisit this model, you can still do some experimental things and improve. But he's got all the character and he's got all the color balancing that we would like in a model. So as a standalone guy, he's certainly well-founded. Good job, yeah, Mr. Red Wizard.
I agree. And there'll be another video on that subject coming in just a few weeks with some different techniques. Okay. Oh, all right. So here we got some faces. Why don't we just take a look at this one together real quick, and we'll do the next.
Oh, James
yeah,
faces?
James here, yeah.
The many faces of James.
Yeah, so he said trying to do some different realistic skin tones. Okay, so we have an African skin tone, we have a Caucasian skin tone. Okay, so on this one, I mean, and skin is such a wonderful thing to explore. It can go in so many different colors. But I think here what you want to do is we need a little more highlight into the dark flesh. You know, the darker skin tone, it's tempting to go up basically only into a sort of mid-tone brown. But of course, the African skin tone still has, you know, their skin still has oils in it. It's still going to reflect light. And so that kind of skin tone should come up a little brighter. And you also want to think about your transition colors moving into things like purples in the same way that you might use crimson on Caucasian skin tones. You can mix in a little like subtle oranges near the highlight, like as let's say your 80% color. So like if 100% is your highlight and 0% is your deepest shadow, at 80%, some very subtle orange transitions. All of flesh is mixed from some kind of orange skin tone, or from orange as a base, from a color wheel perspective. And so it can be, you can bring a little bit of that out subtly because it'll work well with the browns to give you a little more of a smooth transition into these brighter tones. What I usually use is on the highlights and stuff like that, I use a little bit of like Caucasian skin tone mixed in to capture the highlights of what's happening when the black skin tone gets hit by light and reflects right at the sort of highest highlight points. And then as well, I would say you may not want to be, you'll want to smooth this a little more. You have some very deep, heavy shadows like here and here, especially on here on the forehead. Like you're sinking in this gentleman's forehead too much. Like the forehead is still exposed. It shouldn't go down that deep to the point where you've really run some like darn near black shadows in there. I'm okay with that on the sides of the head, but like the forehead is still coming out, right? There's still either at least a downward or perhaps slight positive grade to the slope. So it shouldn't be shadowed that much. So I would smooth this highlight. Like I would bring this to a higher highlight and smooth it out to here. I would bring a higher highlight here, here, and then here. Like this guy has a very expressive face, and then probably on his chin. My advice over,
I was just going to add, I'm glad you said purple on that, because that's been successful for me when I've tried to do this kind of skin tone. Work in the shadows with the deep purple still has a little bit of lifeblood in it, which we do have to remember, right? Like there's still, if you've ever seen a person live with this kind of skin tone, even this dark, when their blood is flowing, when they get heated up, watch athletes, they still get red in the face, even with this kind of dark skin tone. So bear that in mind.
Yep. Okay. So, and then, which is an excellent transition over into the next one, which is over here. I like your 5 o'clock shadow. I think that looks really nice. The problem is the tone itself is very flat, like on the face. We went from like extreme shadowing to basically none. And so what we need here is a lot more introduction of our sepia tones, of our red tones, stuff like that. Like, the Reichland Flesh Shade doesn't have to be used as a wash. You can use it as a controlled application of shade around the temples, a little bit lightly in the brow ridge, stuff like that, creating some deeper, more tan, darker, sepia-infused skin tones around the lower cheeks, around the side of the head, whichever way the light isn't coming from, and so on and so forth. I think that, and then same with the bridge of the nose. Like you went to a red, which I really like. Like I like the life you worked. The lip and the nose are like really subtle, but I would still bring the highlight of the nose up a little bit, and so on and so forth.
It's done a good job on the eyes on this one.
It really has. Like these are great eyes. Like it's a well caught, well mentioned. Like those eyes are really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but for me, I think I do appreciate how he's trying to sell us the idea that this guy's a little bit old and grizzled, so he's left that sort of a bluish bags under the eyes look a little bit. But what I think is effective is on those sort of the bottom eyelid. If that was a little bit more red, but you left the shadow still bluish, I think that would give some greater contrast, and then came back to a little bit more reddish on the sort of outside edges of the cheeks. Then that would really sell that idea.
Yep, I agree. All right. Anything else you want to say about this one?
Nope. I I think I fit in my couple bits.
All right. So next up. Okay, let's see.
Also, I think the first time we've had floating heads on the PmP.
I know, yeah, all right. Martin Grasso brings us a big alligator person man. And then we've got Scott Palmer brings us a little tiefling D&D character. I would love to take the D&D character if that's okay with you.
Good. I knew you'd choose that.
Yeah,
that's good though.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, let's talk about tieflings. I have a love of tieflings going back to the early 90s. I've always thought they're great characters because I was addicted to Planescape and really thought that they were much different than their current incarnation, but I still play them like that. Okay. Anywho, let's talk about this. What's great about tieflings is they can have all sorts of different skin tones and colors and stuff like that. So, oh, interesting. Is one of those customized off the other? That's kind of cool. That's a heck of a lot of work. So A+ on that, if I'm understanding that correctly. All right. So skin tone wise, it's fine. The picture's a little small, so it's going to be kind of hard to read. My overall feedback is I like most of what's going on. The detail on the mini itself feels a little soft, so that's probably interacting here. And I don't know how much you were going for. I mean, the biggest challenge you've got here is smoothing things out. I mean, it's pretty much that simple. If you want my number one piece of feedback, we've got some sort of rough blends, right? Here on the staff, we've got some roughness here where our edge went over too high. Here where, our black is just gone to gray and it's thin lines, no smooth between the two. The yellow has this very dark black brown, but we didn't transition between very easily. The hair, all that's really, really harsh blends. Now, maybe that matters in this case. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know what you're going for. Things I really like, the color itself, all your color choices are really nice. I think they're well and balanced and well chosen. She seems very, noble as a tiefling. I love the inclusion of the red reflections into the hair. I think that's absolutely wonderful since she has this bright red vest that would be kicking light back up. Aces, dig it. We may want to work a little more shadow into some place in the hair. We're kind of universally highlighted all the way around. We're just the dark strands are, in between's dark and the top is light. If you're going to go for these kind of reflection colors, then I'd love to see more rings of light where it would be catching the sheen. So this should be darker and up here should be light and this should be light and so on and so forth. But I love that you captured that and worked that in there. I think that looks really great. Base looks nice little simple water effect. This was the last guy we reviewed this dude before. Yeah, must be that person's backup character. Which I love that we're painting backup characters. You must be in a very brutal game. And then what I really want to take and draw everybody's attention to that I really like is we mentioned the working of reds and those kinds of organic, lifeblood warm colors into the skin. Here we have a blue skin tone, but I want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that he, worked this sort of pink red color into the cheeks and here into the base, the horns and stuff like that to work some more life back into her face. It's a minor touch, but it goes a long way. So I think it's stuff like that's a really, really good choice. So very cool. Dig it.
Is this again, I'm going to expose my lack of knowledge about other games a little bit here. Is this a big feature player character now, this race in the D&D world?
Tieflings, they've moved into the base player's handbook. I mean, like I said, they've been around forever. 4th edition brought them into the main players and they just stayed. But I mean, they've been a player PC choice since the original Planescape supplement in 92 or 3. Oh, okay. So, yeah. And they're I like the old, there used to be a whole table dedicated to them because you're basically you have some percentage of your blood is devil or demon. And so there used to be a big series of tables you could roll on to see how that had manifested. Maybe you had horns, maybe you had hoofed feet, maybe you know what I mean? It was just really cool. So I always loved that table. I like random things like that.
Well, all right.
All right.
Hey, do you love crocodiles as well?
You know what? Yeah, I don't know how much I'd love them if they were walking around on 2 legs coming at me.
Yeah, this guy looks pretty imposing. So this piece done by Martin, he had a couple of specific things that he wanted to dig into with this one, specifically the underbelly and the scales therein. So we'll get to that. First of all, I want to talk about this from a big picture perspective. Obviously, a big model with lots of hard scale texture on it. Also added to by all these sort of spines coming out of his back and a different texture going along the back of him. Big, huge maw that you have to contend with, and then the scales of the underbelly. So let's go talk about the underbelly. He's got a shot, I think, on the next frame. Yeah, here we go. He's all belly exposed, just like Smog. Now, what he asked in here was, should I push contrast here a little bit more to get some more highlights and some more shadow? And I think the forever answer is always yes. Like almost always yes. Now, how do you achieve that here? I think what you do is you think of this as, how hard is this surface, is what you need to sort of imagine, Martin. And the harder you think this surface is, the more sort of gleaming it might be. Think about that from movies you've seen of dragons and things like that. And they have that super hard scales that reflect light and have a sheen to them. So meaning that if you imagine it that way, you can sort of paint it in a similar way to how you might paint metallics. But of course, you're not using raw metallic paint, but you're bringing some highlight spots with some hard edges. You can even see a little bit of it from the way that the light kind of casts down on this. There's sort of like two channels almost that create themselves, where the light strikes from this straight over on the right, and then it sort of bounces across, and then there's another strike of light that comes in a vertical band just a little bit left of center. So if you lean into that and think of it as a hard scale thing, then that's the place where you can sort of bring the curvature of your scale to collect light in those places. Now, as far as the shadow, yeah, still between each segment, I think you leave a little bit of space where it's just your darkest, deeper brown ochre color or whatever it is that you've used in there, right? Leave not just the tiny sharp edge, but leave a little bit mildly broader of a band of darkness in there to separate each scale as well. So that's my recommendation on these things. The other thing I want to talk about as we flip through some other photographs is the red scale of this crocodilian gentleman. They are very well defined. In some cases, the sculpt may look a little bit soft in some places, but overall, there's still enough definition. There's enough space between each of these scales that should certainly be a much darker tone. And you can probably achieve this entire thing by just doing some washes in there. If you want to go to, you don't necessarily need to go brown or red. The other things that will actually define that pretty sharply is, again, can probably go into a purple wash actually, and it'll still read well enough. You'll get some definition. And then if you still do your highlights with a little bit of an orange into your highlight, then it'll actually really contrast nicely. That would be good. And then similarly, I think you can use some darker washes to get right into black to define all these sort of studded tines and things that go along the spine and into the tail. But also, I think that when you get to the edges of it, it would be worthwhile for you to think of it in the same way that you've thought of your talons. And I haven't done the teeth yet on the mouth, I noticed, but if you do it in the same way that you do the talons and the claws on this guy, you should do the same sort of transition on all of these spines
Kiran, you still there? You're kind of breaking up on us, buddy. Hello?
Well,
Still there, bud? Did we lose you? All right. Oh, are you back? Hello? Nope, still nothing. You basically went super robot. All right. Well, Kiran comes back. I'm going to load up Tam the Third's army here. We'll all just celebrate this together. He says he finished it, his big hobby milestone since getting back into Warhammer 2 years ago. 2,400 points of his army. You know, you just want to say thanks to everybody. And I want to say, well done. Congratulations. Like, we'll just take a flip through here. Obviously, most of this wasn't painted this month. This was painted over a long period. But it's great to see. This is his most recent edition. I think this looks really nice, like spotting on the back, the bright color of the fur and stuff. I think you caught the highlights and the feathers really well. So it's great to see this, man, to you know, see this army all come together. To finish an army is an absolutely wonderful moment. So congratulations. I think it looks absolutely great. I think it's going to look wonderful on the tabletop for you. So very, very cool, man. Very cool. Congratulations, and I hope the PmP was able to help. All right. Kiran, you back at all? We still losing you. All right. We'll see if he comes back. I'll keep going. So I gave Dan some feedback on this already, but I'll go ahead and share with everybody else too. This is his Crystal Brush entry for 2019, and he, you know, was kind of looking for feedback on it. How does he keep going? And so my advice was largely that we need to smooth some of this stuff out. Like when we look, I really like his color placement. It's really good. I like the texturing on this, although we can need to tighten up some of these. We don't have enough dots, like more dots, more dots, more dots, more dots. Get them smaller, get them tighter. But they look like transition-wise, they're really nice looking. The copper and stuff like that looks good. Like overall, I love all the colors you're doing and how you've placed them. We really, and this is what I had said in my comments, we really just need to go in and smooth and refine. Like you've done great colors. You've got really nice transitions. I love the balance of all of it. You may want to try to get a teeny-ish bit of purple down here on the base whenever you do it, just to give us a full sort of triangular collaboration on that. But now it's just smoothing. Like here where we can see the sharp lines in the guts. Let's smooth that out. Here where we see the bone, the striations, let's get some smoothness into some of this. We want some sharp lines, but not all of it. Here on like the non-metallic metal, we can use the brush, but we need to bring it down farther. Here where we see like all these paint strokes where we transition between these two colors, like in here, right, where we have these hard lines, we want to smooth all that out. So we're at this point, it's just a game of refine, refine, refine. But overall, I think you've got a really wonderful project going on here, Dan. So I can't wait to see it in person here in like 3 weeks.
Do you catch me now in my audio?
Now you're back. Yay. Yes, you're back.
Yeah, I have to reconnect.
Gotcha. Yeah, you went full robot.
That's good radio.
Yeah, it was just like, it was that for like a minute.
So to finish up what I was saying on Martin's piece, then
yes.
Did you catch me far enough where I was suggesting washes for the main scale?
That's part? Basically where it went wrong.
Okay.
So just kind of pick up from that and you'll do good.
Was to talk about how to handle the spines as well as the talons. So he had a shot here that showed us a little bit close up of the talons of this fella. Maybe it was the main one. Maybe it was the first one. Tailing up with the underbelly. Yeah, second frame where we looked at the underbelly. So what I wanted to suggest here is think of the spines on this guy, obviously a different color, but the same kind of surface texture as the talons. So what I've seen you started to do here on the talons is you moved from an ochre color into a white. Okay, and you've done that movement of transition to that. That hasn't happened on the spines, though. The spines from root to tip are just highlighted evenly across the whole length of it. But what I'm suggesting is that I think that we should have a little bit more sort of color transition, so that maybe, although you don't go quite all the way to white from root to tip, but you start super dark and you move into a mid gray or even a little higher gray when you get to the edge. And I think that look, as you do each of those, towards share that contrast too that we were talking about throughout the rest of the model. So there you go. That is my stuff. In closing,
Nope, losing you again.
Nice job on that.
I think he's saying nice job overall. All right, so while we're waiting on him to even out and then catch up, Skeleton brings us a rock.
Focus Maw
that's
as
his
well, because that's the place that people are going to look at first.
And now it's just giving us everything that he's catching up on. So, a rock. Skeleton brings us a rock. It's a rock. He has lots of different colors in it. I would like everybody to draw their attention to the humble rock. Why I like Skeleton's rock and why I'm actually taking a moment to talk about a rock is because, are you back here and are you still robot-y? I think he's still sketchy. All right. So what I want to draw attention to, yeah, you're still robot-y, is the wonderful browns and reds. The red. We've got browns here. Look at our greens here, right? Lots and lots of tones in rocks in the natural world. This is the most common thing I see people do when they paint rocks. They just make them like gray and white and call it a day. And there's no rock, well, I shouldn't say there's no rock. There are very few rocks in the world that are true just like gray. They're probably sitting in a lab somewhere because like rocks sit outside. It rains outside. That's where they keep all the dirt. And dirt isn't gray and white, right? So like it's going to get up on there. Life is going to attach itself. There's a bunch of grass right near this rock. That means things are going to grow up onto the rock. There's going to be mossy colors and, things like that. Little bacterium and paramecium and stuff swimming up on the water that's left here. And then they die and they leave behind organic detritus and so on and so forth. So like working extra colors into your stone is what really brings it to life and makes it pop. So, hey, awesome final submission. I kind of wish we should have done that one last. All right, let's see if you're back now. Kiran? Nope. Nope.
I'm trying to be here.
Oh, hold on. There you go. Are you back? Okay. All right. So, he's not too late. No, you made it on 228. You're good. Yep. So let's take a look at his demon prints here. His demon prints of Nurgle. Wonderful conversion from a lot of different things. Let's go to... So the first thing I'll say is we want to watch the light situation. You have a very direct light. Like, look at how much better this picture looks for the color than this one. All right? See how overexposed this is? Where, like, it's blasting out all your color and just making it look white. Right. And as someone who takes crappy photos, believe me, I understand. It's tough to take good photos. Like I do. But it's like this naturalistic lighting is honestly better. You want to balance it out. Don't put a direct light on it. You want it like you want diffused light. Okay. So he's very busy. That's what I will say. There's a lot going on. Okay. And Kiran, go ahead and talk for a minute. Nope. All right, maybe he's reconnecting a minute. All right. So, you have a lot going on here, as you would expect from a big demon prince. I like all the different colors. I think everything still segments out pretty well. The blue in sort of the steel and the metal versus the copper and stuff like that. The bright green is tough because it doesn't have quite as many places. I like the addition of the spit. That's really good on his weird twisted maw. So I dig that. I like the use of the rust and weathering in here. I think that as with any Demon Prince of Nurgle, we would expect to see a lot of that. And so I think that looks actually really, really good. You got a lot of orange. It's hiding down in cracks. Now, one thing I noticed, I want to take a moment here to talk about these claws, where you have kind of a bright metal and then it just goes straight to orange. Like, we want to watch that. If this is going to rust, which certainly that's going to be the case, then this is going to be a lot duller. There's going to be more brown tones in here and stuff like that. So when like orange is a step, 4 steps down in the weathering pattern, from like yellow brown deposits to brown rust to old brown rust to orange. And then, you know, so there's like, you want to make sure you capture all those steps being trapped in there. The chain captures it really nicely because you got a lot of different tones worked into there. Overall, this dude's a heck of a conversion, man. He looks pretty great. Really, really unique model. I like all the bits shoved together. I think you've got that. Oh my God, that little dude is creepy as all get out. I love him. That's amazing. That dude looks great. I like the wings mixed with sort of the organic wings mixed with the little flyy spinny things and stuff like this. When you got these flying spinny wing things, think about like how these would actually gunk up around the joints and stuff. But if they still work, they still fly, then you want it to sort of like have these be maybe a little more clean, but have the outer edges here be really highly rusted, scuffed, scratched, dented, and so on and so forth, right? So you can use tricks like that to show that like this is still a working mechanism. It's just through the power of you know, the warp, somehow this ridiculous rusted machine still works, but then that would still have certain physical properties, right? Where like this would be less tarnished. Working in some blacks and deeper browns and then some orange around the very edge, stuff like that might be a way to go. But overall, man, this is creation. I do want to take a moment here to talk about this stuff, all your freehand in here. It's really, really wonderful. Like, there's a couple different instances of it. I just want to make sure we kind of capture it here. I like your green gooey capture too. I think that looks really nice. Like, your green goop in general looks really nice. I would just like to see a little more of it, honestly, kind of spread around. Let me see. There we go. Yeah. Man, your freehand is really top notch. Like, I love it. Like, you are a really talented artist when it comes to this stuff. And I love how you just worked it in here so subtly. Like, you can look at the model and not even really notice, but then when you explore, you find it. And I think it's really, really well done. It's fantastic. It adds so much character to this dude and sets him apart as a character, as the Demon Prince, having these extra sort of macabre visions of nightmarish scenes attached to him. I think looks absolutely wonderful, like on his tabarding and stuff like that. Final notes on things I really like. The bottles, little piece of liquid, look really good. And like those look great. No issues there. No pushback. Wonderful work. And the skin tone. I haven't mentioned it much at all yet, but I do want to talk about it. You did a wonderful job of capturing sort of this ridiculously stretched, bruised skin tone. I think it's fabulous. You worked in these purples and blues into this otherwise, you know, what would be kind of theoretically a Caucasian alive skin tone. And I think it looks absolutely great. So I really, really dig the skin tone you achieved here. I think that looks really nice. That area, I don't think it is that's molto bene, top notch. I dig the heck out of it, man. This is a hell of a creation, something you should be super, super duper proud of. What I would say to focus on is some more variation in the weathering and the metallics, stuff like that. And then maybe seeing where we can balance that green out just a little. Like, those tubes are so dominating and so bright. They draw my attention. There's no real counterbalance to them when I'm looking front on. So compositional feedback more than anything.
Okay. I went and got an external mic. Is this coming through?
There you go. Yay, you're working now. Okay.
Okay.
So I think these last three were technically these last three are technically March, but I don't know that they're reposted. So I thought we could fly through them real quick. Obviously, we're not going to do the March review from here. So like, we'll post about that, but you want to post in the new Facebook group. But do you want to take these real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
I think we may as well. I know that Alan posted his too. Alan posted his elsewhere already. I know that for sure.
Oh, did he? Okay, so let's just handle these two then. That's fine. We'll do Alan's. Alan, you'll have to wait, buddy. Sorry. We'll get you in. We'll get you in the Facebook review though. But good. I'm glad you got over there. Everybody, like, I think we made an official post, right? Telling people please post in this for March.
Yes, I posted in the Facebook group that I want people to post in both places. I did not post over here because I assumed that they would post over here, and that's okay.
Okay. I'll throw up a new post that says
I will do that.
4th. Yeah. Okay, cool. Good. All right. So I'll tell you what, I want them sepulchral stalkers if you're down with the AdMech duty. All right with that?
Yep. Let's go.
All right. So sepulchral stalkers from Tristan Gray. I saw these. He thinks these are the best bases he's ever done. He tried something new on the blue armor. He's got glowing eyes. Okay, good. He thought he shot in the dark. He wanted to push the contrast as much as possible. Sweet, man. Let's take a look. I love these guys. These are such great sculpts. Okay. So, yeah, contrast. Bueno. I dig it. Here's what we need to do. Smooth it out. Like, this is a great value sketch of exactly how I would do this. You captured this like metallic blue, the way you've got the light line coming down the middle, the shadow then underneath, this different color on top. Good. Well done. Like you've sketched it all out. You have the understanding of the light. That's the toughest part. And now it's just refinement. So you want to smooth it out. Like, I mean, I'm not going to tell you to go back and do more with this. Like you can do whatever you want, but like you want to smooth these transitions, right? Because we've still got very hard lines. We want a little bit smoother of a transition going down here into this and coming into the blue. Like this should have maybe some light blue as it fuzzes out and so on and so forth. But so that's that piece. But light placement is good. You've got all the segments nice and well black lined. They stand out really well. That's what you need. I dig it. The glowing eyes, yeah, they work. I think they're fine. You did the important part, which is you didn't cast too much green around here, and you kept a nice dark ring around the edge. That's the critical component. You have a little light glow out here. Your bright part is in the center, and you have a dark ring around to really create that contrast. So that's well executed and well done. Your bases do look great. I think that let's get those black rimmed so we can get them cleaned up. We were so excited that we forgot to black rim the base. I'll forgive you this time, but go ahead and finish that out. As to the stone, see what I said a minute ago about his rocks. You have nice gray rocks sitting in a yellow sand desert. Is there no wind in this desert? Because I would think that some of the sand would blow onto the rocks and would deposit its light yellowish, brownish color onto those rocks, right? So like work some different tones up on there, use some pigment, use some paint, use whatever you want. You can use 1,000 different techniques. Just get some of that color up onto those gray rocks to carry that out. So only other thought is your pink probably needs to be placed a little bit elsewhere. Like you brought the pink up to the top in the headdress and in the shoulder, but then there's nowhere else. So like off the top of my head, it could be, it could have like a segment. There could be a couple segments that are pink or something like that. You could do a couple stripes of it over the bone on the tail. Like there's no reason some of the bones couldn't have paint stripes on them. They don't have to be just in bone. You could even like stipple it so it looks rough and worn off. Maybe a segment of the halberd, like a haft is pink. Something like that. Just a little minor touch of it somewhere else. Maybe the onks or the eye onks or whatever they are on the gold. Maybe those are in pink. Or maybe the circles themselves are pink and then the onk is gold. Right? So you've got options of where you could go with that just to kind of scatter that around. When you use a really bright, punchy, powerful color like pink, you've got to be very careful about color balancing it out because otherwise it will just dominate because it's such a powerful color. But yeah, man, these look great. Awesome work. Tomb Kings took 42nd recently this last weekend at a tournament. So there you go. Pretty good for halfway up the pack for a quote unquote non-existent army. Not bad.
Unless you're playing Ninth Age and then they place well.
Ah, there you go.
Just saying.
But they're not called Tomb Kings. They're something else.
No, they're not. Anyway, that's not why we're here. Let's look at James' piece here to wrap up the fabulous February.
Oh, he got small.
He gives us one big shot of this thing, but there's lots to drink in. Is it not something you can expand?
No, I can't zoom in. I don't know why I did that.
Okay.
Like, it just makes it small in this picture.
Back off.
Tell you what, yeah, there you go. Let's just do this because that's actually a nice
it comes
big
up
picture.
better here.
Yeah.
So what I think is fantastic about this, I'm going to lavish a lot of praise for James' efforts here on creating a lot of textures. So within his robes, if we look a fair bit closely at his robes, he's got a lot of texture that's going into that so that you can actually feel the fabric of it. It's a very sort of deep red, and it comes through. I think what I detect here is he's done a fair bit of stippling technique with some glaze overlays to make that shine through. But I think it really, really reads well. Even on the top of the cowl where he gets into that white sort of Meccano framing of the cowl that he does in the white gray, that reads pretty well as well. And he also encompasses the texture in there. And then all these interesting little bits and pieces that he's done on this Mars landscape of his basing actually is really attractive too. There's a few sort of buried bits of tech in there. There's some bubbling ooze at his feet as well, and then other bits of sort of rusted, oxidized places that go on there. And this, of course, plays well to bring in that reddish and orange stuff throughout the center of the model, right from the top to the bottom. The other thing that, of course, is a big feature of this model is all the metallic that is going on. So starting with the Techno axe and working all across to his other apparatus and his servos. I think that his color placement and smoothness of transition is really brilliantly done. But the one thing that I think that if I do have a critique about the way the metallic's done is I think there's lots of places where it could be sharper. And this is just by doing the edge in an almost absolute white to create the hard edges. You certainly have created hard edges on the axe and on the top of his, above his head around that cowling. You've captured the sharp edges there. But in quite a number of other places, the canisters, the sort of spur apparatuses that are coming off on the lower part of his Techno axe. I don't know what else to call it, but the Techno axe. There's a little Vox caster thing that appears to be on there. The edging on all this stuff, I think, could come to a sharper, almost white to define a little bit. If I'm being overcritical, it might be because of the focus of the photo that you've taken. But that's the read from this photo anyway, is that those edging can be sharpened up a little bit. What else do I like? I do like that in those canisters on the top of his back, you've gone into a little bit of bluish stuff there. I think that, to show off liquid and translucence if it's a glass vial, then you could come a little bit brighter in some of that blue space. But then we have to do something about triangulation to balance that. I don't know if this plasma coil is a little bit more blue if we see it from the side angle. I hope it is, because that would certainly be a place that you could draw some other blue into it. And then if you're thinking about triangulation and color balancing, that's sort of the lower half of the Techno axe is also a place that could move into a little bit more blue to get you that triangulation in there, and maybe even brighten up the lenses of the tech priest himself for his eye sockets. I noticed that you've done a little bit of that on the servos. You got a little bit of blue lens going on there. But it needs a little bit more weight down below to do that triangulation. But I think you've achieved a lot of good things here. Again, I marvel at the texture that you've done in the fabric. I think that's fantastic, and your light catches and positioning of all that light reflection on your metallic is also well done. Just needs to sharpen, I think. So that's a good piece of work to wrap up February. So thanks for that, James, and thanks for everybody else who's done their hard work in the shortest month of the year as we come to a close on a lovely February. And you have put yourself on mute, sir.
Sorry, I was doing it. There we go. And that brings us to the end of our Google Plus journey. It's been a good run. But our next review will be from the Facebook group. So like I said, we'll put a post up to remind everybody to post over there. If you're a current PmP member, as you know, Google Plus will be shutting down at the beginning of April. So we won't have a chance to do a review out of this. That's why we're not doing anything for March in here. So please post over there. Come join us over there. It's a closed group. We have an event scheduled for each month where you can post your end of month review submissions to. Same rules apply. Please limit yourself to one submission and please focus on, give us something to focus on for the items you want us to give you targeted feedback on. The more you give us, the more we can give you. The photos stay in post order if you post under the event. A new event goes up at the beginning of every month. That's where we'll review from. We'll review from the chronological history of that event. Then, use the regular Facebook group for everything else you would normally do, like your progress pics and your questions and your feedback and everything that you want. And now we come to the question, Kiran, do you have your pick for your favorite of the month for this month?
I am scanning back in time.
I know what mine is. This is. I mean, there was a lot of good work this month, but there's an easy pick for me this month.
Okay, well you get it then.
Okay, it's Muir. It's the
old lady and the baby.
Yes, I loved it. It's so great. Absolutely beautiful capture of narrative and life and light. So like busts are often an experiment in light. And it's just wonderful. It blew me away. I mean, it's just gorgeous.
Well, I'm going to lean into my a little bit of biased favoritism here. And I think that I'm going to go back early in the month to James Wilson when he did the Dwarf Slayer.
Ah, sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
He did that brushed metal metallic style.
Yeah.
And had his orange reflecting the environment of the hair, this crazy dwarf hair around him.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good capture of environment.
It's a great piece. I dug that one too. Good picks all around. Thank you to everybody who submitted this month. Thank you to everybody, as we always say, who gives all the feedback, who's answering questions every day. I certainly try to pop in as much as possible, but we all get there together as a community. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you all come join us in the Facebook group for our next leg of the PmP journey. The hobby journey goes ever onward towards an infinite horizon, and we're all going to get there together. So thank you very much, everybody. Certainly appreciate you watching. And as always, we'll see you next month.